So, okay, I'll talk about it in my most based thing this week update, and I'll also talk about it in the news at more and more length. But I was on my way to this thing, right? And it's an event. It's a protest to do with trans kids, and I was on the way out the door. I got a delivery that I'm really excited about. It's a book called I forgot the author's name, but it's called "The Quiet Damage: QAnon and the Destruction of the American Family." And I'm super excited about it, right? Because like if anyone in our audience is not familiar with my essay work, like I am a political epistemologist and I specialize in like misinformation, conspiracy theories and stuff, right? I've been looking forward to getting my hands on this book. It's about QAnon, and I was so excited about it. And I was going to the event, and I've made this joke to my girlfriend earlier already that like the title, unfortunately, like The Quiet Damage, unfortunately does sound like a little bit like a transphobe book. Like
Oh yeah, yeah,
it
yeah. They
does
do
sound
have
like a
names like
little
that.
bit
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Mm.
like like just a paint by numbers like stock transphobe book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Like what was that one? Like
And
the gay shame and things like
yeah,
that. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
very like that kind of tone. Yeah.
And I took a picture of it as I was walking along, just a picture of it in my hand, and I posted it on my Instagram story, and then I put like "Let's fucking go" like over as text on the image. But the little label "Let's fucking go" just perfectly covered up QAnon, and so it looked way more like it's this like
Yeah,
horrible book because it just said "The Quiet Damage: The Destruction of the American Family," and it's got like a
yeah.
picture of like a happy little like white family all smiling with the American flag.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, "Oh shit, what have I done?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No. Yeah. I love that. Anyway,
It's Red Planet.
welcome to Red Planet. How we doing?
I'm pretty good, but I want to know what the most base thing you did the last like 3 weeks is, Tim.
Oh yeah. It has wow, yeah, it has been a couple weeks. Shit. I've done a couple little things since then. The most recent would be I actually think there was one just the other day. I mean, I've done this kind of stuff every now and then, but I've been kind of like just as for those that don't know, in my day job, I am a tattooist, a tattooer, tat lord, and occasionally volunteer my services. Sometimes even just for doing art, but sometimes for doing cover-ups for people that have like my general policy is if you have a tattoo that is associated with like abuse or like some kind of trauma or whatever like that, just we'll cover it up. Like I'll cover it up for free. We don't need to worry about that. We'll just do it. And yeah, doing a little bit of that is probably, I can't really go into too much specifics because every time I do something like that it's generally pretty sensitive. But yeah, doing a little bit of that has been
Yeah,
good.
that's
It's
incredibly based. That's so moving because, like, I mean, when I was in an abusive relationship and I was getting a tattoo, I remember like the artist who was giving to me, like, saying, like, if you'd like this change made at any later point, we'll do this for free. And I didn't understand at the time they were saying, like, if you'd like it changed to not have anything to do with her, right? Like,
yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's like a thing that I actively try and do. And like, I mean, a lot of the times, yeah, it's like a fine line between like, because there have been times people have come in for tattoos where I felt like the vibes are off and I won't do it. But I would never be like, hey, I'm not going to do this because I think the vibes that you guys have are totally fucked. Because that's like, that could just exacerbate the situation or whatever. But usually it's just like, oh shit, I'm busy. I'm so busy. I don't have time to do, or just something like that. Um, and but yeah, there have been times where I've had to tell people. Sometimes if people come in with their partner, it can be a little bit trickier, but sometimes people will come in by themselves for a tattoo, and it's just like, yeah, I don't know about this one. There was a this is like kind of a funny one. This isn't like associated with abuse, but there was a girl that I've tattooed a couple times who she came in one time, and she's quite young. Like I think she's only 18 or 19 now. She came in to get this tattoo that we'd talked about, and then they talked about adding in her new boyfriend's name. And I was like, I don't think you should do it. And she's like, oh no, we talked about it a lot. I really want to do it and stuff. And my thing to her was like, if would he let you go through his phone? And she's like, I don't know. It's like, well, if he wouldn't let you go through his phone, you shouldn't get this tattoo. Just like, okay, yeah, all right. So there's stuff like that. But yeah, anyway, what about you, Soph? What is the most base thing you've done recently?
Well, yeah, it has been a few weeks. So let me think back, cast my mind all the way back. I've been pretty busy. My girlfriend had her nephew come and visit. This isn't like especially based. I'm just kind of filling in time that I've been spending, but like for most of the week last week, my girlfriend's little nephew, who is 7, was visiting. He's adorable. He's also a little bit of a tyrant. We had to listen to quite a few tantrums about Roblox. Um, but like
Roblox is so like bizarre to me. Like, yeah, I've got nieces and nephews that are into that as well, and I'm just like, this
I'm
is
really,
like,
especially when it comes to video games. Yeah, like with video games, I'm not used to feeling old, but like I'm just like, oh, what is
it's like
happening?
Gmod meets like meets Minecraft meets like all this other
Yeah,
stuff, and it's just like
exactly.
chaos. Yeah, yeah, and it's child labor violations as well. We've all seen the video.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
But I
yeah,
mean, so that
so
was, that was nice. That was a chill time. His dad is a single dad, so like we were giving like him a bit of respite as well by like taking care of the kid, and like I cooked
hmm,
the dinner for everyone a couple of times during the week, and it was really sweet. But that's just living life. I think living life is based. I want to say that. Um, but I have been working towards my return to publishing my video essays. I'm in the process of making like several to release over the next few months, and I filmed one this week, so that felt like a huge achievement after like taking a long hiatus to like work on my personal life and like dealing with a lot of harassment this year. Like it's yeah, it feels huge to like finally get back around to recording and editing something. But it was actually a cute time. Like I had a couple of friends over and they helped me with it, and like we had a laugh, and yeah, it made it a lot easier. Um, but the thing that I think is most based that I think I will be talking about in the news as well, so I'm not going to go on and on about it just now, um, is that there is an occupation right now at the Department for Education in London, near Westminster. Basically, a bunch of trans kids have gotten together and they're like camping out in front of the building or like in the alcoves at the base of the building. And they've put up banners that are like trans kids deserve better. And yeah, I've been over there yesterday a couple of times. We bought them like pizzas during the communal meal, which went down a treat, obviously. We also brought them like a bunch of supplies for making placards, and like a friend of mine came to join in, and she stayed overnight to like make sure that they didn't get any trouble from like weirdos,
yeah.
which is obviously a huge concern. Yeah, they're super cool kids. Like I will talk about this more in terms of what they're doing and what their like aims are, but it's just so sweet to see like young people organizing. They've organized before, this group, and they've done
Yeah.
actions before, but they like seeing them in action and just like they've got their like walkie talkies and they've got like code names and shit, and they're like going on the walkie talkie and being like, hey, who do you have the burner phone? I think Woodlouse has it. I wanted to take a picture of Archer wearing a silly hat. And it's just like they're doing all of the like OPSEC stuff, but like they're also teenagers, and it's just like it's so sweet.
Yeah,
um
yeah. That's
but
awesome. Yeah, it
yeah.
was quite good. There's recently there's been a young group pop up here as well, Trans Liberation Alliance, I think it is. That have been, yeah, super sick to see pop up. They're kind of like the generation below, like the activist generation below kind of the crowd that I came through with. And so yeah, like other friends of mine that like have been involved in like particularly been spokespeople for the trans community at these rallies and stuff like that. Like these are the kids that kind of like looked up to them, and it's like kind of like really sweet to come through, and then to see like like the people that there was uh like the generation above kind of my generation or whatever, that the things that we learned from them or took from them or anything like that, and then kind of like passing those things on to the next generation and all that kind of stuff. But also like I think it's really cool to see them doing their own thing, and also to allow them to do that and like to support them and be involved without trying to like step in and be like because like that's a thing that I see a lot with kind of senior generations of activists, where they will kind of like step in and try and like take control and stuff. And it's kind of like, I think it's better to offer support and like help them do what they're doing without trying to make it like, yeah, you don't need to
Well,
like,
I'll say for hopefully obvious reasons as the anecdote unfolds, there's an activist in the UK who is a pretty prominent, like, or was a pretty prominent gay rights activist through Section 28, through like legalization of homosexuality, through like gay marriage, and like, but he's like, he's a bit of a celebrity activist. And like a few years ago, like early days of me getting involved with trans activist stuff, which I don't really do that much. Like, I showed up for this thing. I don't tend to get that involved with trans politics stuff. But like when I did, I remember there being a couple of events that like he tried to like basically make all about him. And it's just like, he's a cis guy. Like he's a white cis man. Like, yes, he is gay and he has been an activist for a long time. But it's like, what are you doing, dude?
and there's a point where that becomes kind of like well, that becomes like trans misogyny sort of thing, like it's like, okay, well, this like cis person is taking over. And yeah, and like there's even been cases where it's like someone has been told, hey, look, this is not the place for you to kind of like assume this authority or anything like that. And then all of a sudden like, oh, this new group it's an op, they're wreckers and all this kind of, and it's just like, man, like you just need to let this new generation kind of like do their thing, and we can like support them and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's
I mean,
a
I
side
find I find intergenerational activist stuff so heartening. Like there was
note.
exactly as you said, there were like people who are like as much older than me as I am older than these like kids, or
Yeah.
even older. Like they're also supporting them. And
Mm.
so it's just like really lovely seeing people come together in that way. And like I was for a little while just like sitting with all the like art supply stuff and making the placards, and we were just like
Yeah.
chatting and like working on stuff, and like I was helping them like brainstorm like what do you want to put on the thing, like coming up with
Yeah.
like funny slogan ideas, and like and they had great ideas, right? Because kids are just like naturally creative.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't want to like use up a placard, but I had some spare paper and I made a little thing that said Sir Keir Starmer has a perfectly square head, and then a little Keir
Yeah.
Starmer with a cube head. Um, anyway,
Minecraft Steve head.
exactly. Minecraft Steve with his stupid quiffed hair. But yeah, we were just sitting around chatting with these young trans people, and one of them at some point was like, um, in the middle of a long anecdote about like drama with their friends, and then was like, but no infighting, no infighting in our community. We're not going to do it. And I just to my girlfriend, I was like, no infighting in that community, and she went like, they're going to be okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's, well, glad to hear the kids are going to be okay. That's it's a lot off my mind. Cool. Well, um, so that's the yeah. That was the most
Yeah.
base stuff that we did this week. But we do want to know what kind of base things you have all been doing. You can message us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, or send us an email at based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you're cool with that, and we might shout you out in a later episode. But now for the news. So what's been happening in Bangladesh recently?
Jesus, what a time to not be doing the show the last couple of weeks. When it comes to Bangladesh, everything's been happening, but
Yeah.
they've overthrown a dictatorship. Let's just cut straight to it. Bangladesh PM Sheikh Hasina flees. Army says interim government to be formed. So we've been reporting the last few shows on protests that have been going on in Bangladesh. They've been evolving for a few months now. And the initial kind of inciting incident was around these job quotas. So basically, there were job quotas that like were guaranteeing jobs for people who'd fought in this previous war, or like sorry for family members of people, and creating this sort of cadre class. It's very similar to stuff that
Yeah.
happened around the Cultural Revolution in China. Um, and people found it to be unjust, and so students were protesting because it's just like, like it's hard enough getting a job, but then this just became the inciting incident because after these protests like turned violent, right? Because like if there is a super unjust regime, right, and people are so repressed by the government, sometimes it's just like the initial protest can be about something that you're just like, okay, I don't entirely understand why people are so steamed about that, but then like the police response is the thing that
Yeah.
really kicks it off, and that's exactly what's
Yeah.
happened here, because a bunch of people were killed by the police, and then it really kicked off. So protests in Bangladesh against government job quotas turned into a nationwide movement demanding Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's resignation. The protests led to widespread violence with clashes across the country, resulting in the deaths of hundreds. On August 5th, Prime Minister Hasina resigned and fled to India following the crackdown on protesters. The situation escalated the situation escalated when jubilant crowds stormed the presidential residence, looting valuables and vandalizing a statue of Hasina's father, Sheikh
Winter Palace moment.
Mujibur Rahman. Yeah, absolutely. There were like, there's that great painting, right? It has come to pass of the Soviet soldier just standing, just like
Yeah.
looking around the ridiculously resplendent, like
Yeah.
obnoxious, ostentatious Zaz throne room. But like, I love the direct parallel between like that painting and what we have today, which is just like little like Instagram reels and TikToks of people just like going into like their parliaments, like just average
Yeah. Yeah.
guys just like chilling out, just being like at
It's
the
like
at the
hands in the
desk of
pocket,
some.
like looking
Yeah.
around.
Yeah, it's so good. Anyway, General Waka Uz Zaman, the newly appointed army chief, announced Hasina's resignation on a national television. He declared the formation of an interim government after holding discussions with major political parties, excluding Hasina's Awami League. President Mohammed Shahabuddin ordered the release of opposition leader Begum Khaleda Zia from prison, signaling a shift in the political landscape. Zia had been imprisoned since 2018 on corruption charges. The United States urged the interim government to be inclusive and democratic. Well, we know how much America loves democracy, so while America's keeping an eye on Bangladesh's new government, we'll be keeping an eye on America keeping an eye on them. It
Yeah.
emphasized the need for all parties to avoid further violence and work toward restoring peace in the country. Violence and unrest continued, with reports of over 150 deaths since the protests began. The interim government faced challenges in maintaining order as student activists and other groups called for further demonstrations against Hasina's regime. So yeah, it will continue to be an ongoing story, I think. Tim, you have thoughts on
Yeah,
this?
yeah. Yeah, it's still going as well, actually. There's still protests and everything like that going. There's like other stuff that has kind of happened because there's been like some severe weather events and stuff like that. So it's like it's still very much like a yeah, it's a pretty wild time for Bangladesh at the moment. Like yeah, so yeah, it's one of those wild things where they have this there's this moment of yeah, like revolution. They literally overthrew the government and stuff. And then there's I think it's what is that? It's like a gigantic flood that's come through. And it's like, okay, well, what happens now? It's yeah, I think there's what is it? Is 300,000 people in emergency shelters at the moment, people stranded, a lot of people hurt and killed and stuff. And it's kind of like, one of those points where it's like, okay, do people retreat to like the comfort, or is this a time when like yeah, I mean, is this the time where something new is kind of birthed? We'll see. Hopefully everything turns out
Yeah.
okay for them. I feel like in this is like a like these weather events is a kind of like a very like testing moment, but I feel like it's in a lot of cases it's harder to overthrow a government. It's harder to like to stage a revolution. So they've already done that
Yeah.
part, and hopefully yeah, we can look forward to a more equitable society in
Yeah, fingers crossed. I
Bangladesh.
mean, ultimately, if nothing comes of this, we just have to remember that like every time there is a revolutionary moment like this, it's just an opportunity for things to improve for people. And then
Mm,
like when things do improve, the countries, the societies that form out of those improvements, like like socially like those well truly revolutionary moments like those societies then support each other,
yeah,
and make more moments possible. And so even if it doesn't happen now, somewhere somewhen it does, and then shit pops off. So but fingers crossed for
yeah.
them. Do you
Mm.
want to tell us about Columbia University?
Oh yeah, yeah. So Columbia University, which we did follow like the events there as they were kind of unfolding through the news here. They were the site of some of the biggest like pro-Palestinian rallies in out of all of the American universities. They were huge. Like that was the one that was in the news, right? Like the one that was the really enduring one that the university and well like the university administration above even like the teachers and everything like that and the local law enforcement were really working together to bust these protests and in like all kinds of different ways from like defaming individual protesters through to like like literal like police violence and everything like that. And so, well, but those protesters are feeling vindicated as their university president, Namat Minouche Shafiq, abruptly resigned after a brief tenure marked by her crackdown on anti-genocide protests, which, has obviously sparked mixed reactions among students and the facility. So last spring, student protests erupted at Columbia in response to Israel's genocide in Gaza. Students, including Mariam Awan, established a Gaza solidarity encampment, demanding the university divest from Israel-related investments and call for a ceasefire. So yeah, but under Shafiq's leadership, Colombia's administration responded harshly to the protest by calling in police to dismantle the camp and punish students, which included suspensions and other disciplinary actions. Shafiq's handling of the situation led to criticism from faculty, like Professor Carl Hart, who felt that her actions violated academic principles and compromised the safety and rights of students. In April, Shafiq testified before Congress regarding accusations of anti-Semitism at Columbia. Her testimony was seen as yielding to political pressure and further strained relations with the university community. Following her resignation, faculty members like Nara Milanich called for a renewed commitment to academic freedom. Student activists, while cautiously optimistic, expressed concerns over potential future crackdowns on campus activism and under new leadership. So yeah, so
Mm,
that's the guts of the thing. The interesting thing here is it's like I mean this was Colombia was one of the main ones that was getting a lot of press. There was like like all these like right-wing figures on the internet were calling for like the National Guard to be sent in. There was like just like wild these right-wing talking heads that were like Colombia is like the battleground for our nation and all this kind of stuff, which is like obviously just like fascists kind of like overreacting and like freaking out and stuff. But in some sense it is true, like it's I think like that little battle there is could be like a real like I mean you could see it as like a really rallying moment for the rest of the world. And you see like a lot of other universities all around the world, even down here at Auckland University, a lot of other people staging solidarity rallies. And yeah, so it's really interesting to see them actually be vindicated in this way, because that's not something that you often really get, right? Like,
yeah.
like usually it just kind of it'll like afterwards it'll just kind of like die down, and then that like the people that are I guess on the side of the establishment that have kind of like turned the wheels of all the terrible stuff usually just kind of get to just keep on doing things. Well, like there's like people, yeah, that at the university that were suspended and expelled and all that kind of stuff, where it's like usually it's the protesters that you know are the ones that have to live with the consequences of speaking up and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, it's an
yeah,
interesting one.
interesting.
I mean, like, because as you said, like, like the Colombia president, who has resigned, like, testified before Congress, and that
Mm-hmm.
was, that was what Congress was investigating was, anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Yeah,
This ridiculous, like, thing was being trotted around.
yeah,
Like, it's curious to we have to wonder whether it's like the pressure from below is what's gotten the Colombia president to resign, gotten to Shafiq to resign, or
like a
if it's like
sacrificial
the
lamb
ruling
kind of thing.
class, right? Because if it's the latter, then it's going to be like it's most likely they're going to bring in someone who is much more like much
Yeah,
sterner
it's
with students and
possible.
much
Yeah,
more willing to crack down. But I don't know which way. Yeah, which way this
yeah.
will go.
It's yeah, it is interesting because yeah, you could see even yeah her position as being like an offering or whatever like that to be like, oh yeah, no,
Mm,
we've dealt with the problem now. But then you even see there was um there I did see when preparing the notes there were teachers from Colombia who had expressed similar sentiments and like some of them that seemed to support the idea of being like, oh yeah, now we can get in someone that will like there's like this line about like academic freedom and it's like on one side people are like, yes, academic freedom means that we can have these protests and we can speak out, and then on the other side there's a bunch of people saying academic freedom is freedom from seeing these protests, freedom to come to our university and not be like
yeah,
not have our space impeded on, because I think the thing
freedom
with
from
Colombia
anyone
is
ever
they
being mad at me for any reason ever.
a lot of the talking heads were kind of saying like this occupies so much space that people can't get to classes and everything like that, and so the Colombia like encampment in particular, they were like, no, we're not blocking access to anywhere, we are making it so you will have to you'll have to walk around, which might take you a little bit longer, but nobody is being blocked from classes, so it's this kind of thing where it's like, oh man, academic freedom means that you don't have to like take the 30-second detour around it's just like it's ridiculous, like no one is really being infringed, having their academic rights infringed on in that way. Like,
Yeah,
if you want to talk
except for
about
students
academic,
who are practicing their free speech and then being fucking suspended for protesting against a genocide. Like
yeah,
they,
and it's like
yeah,
if you want to talk about academic freedom, talk about like how many universities are left standing in Gaza? Like none. Like there's no schools. It's like yeah, like anyone that is trying to make that argument but doesn't want to talk about that shit is like a rat. Like just like I
yeah,
know that's mean to
exactly.
rats. Like rats are beautiful creatures. They're just yeah, they're
Yeah.
scabs. So they are. Um, so yeah, like I think that's always going to be part of the, it's like a lot of people are just focusing just on the university issue, but it's like I think
Mm,
that also kind of like is a useful distraction from what what these people were actually protesting and what the conversation that they were trying to have.
yeah,
And I think that like I think that there were commentators on the right that were definitely aware of that, where they were like, let's reframe this issue as like some kind of like local attack on us, as opposed to drawing attention to the bigger issue, which is what the whole thing is about, right? So yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But what about why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening over there with what you were talking about earlier about the trans kids
Yeah, sure.
occupying the Department of Education?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I did already mention this a couple of times. So I haven't talked about what it is that the group are really doing. So a group of young activists have occupied the UK Department of Education, staging an ongoing protest outside the government building with banners across the front of the department reading "Trans kids deserve better." Then in July, we actually reported on this at the time, the same group scaled the front of the NHS England headquarters with a banner that read, "We are not pawns for your politics." And they have a great logo, by the way. It's a pawn with a little like queen's head on it, like when you promote
Yeah.
a pawn in chess. And so it's kind of like then they're not a pawn in the game, but it's also like the pawn is transgender. Whoa. Um, their protest was supported by trans adults and allies who carried signs and chanted outside the building. The one back in July. Yeah, so I think this is really interesting. And something I forgot to say when I was talking about it earlier is that it is ongoing right now. If you're if you're watching the live stream, it's ongoing right now. Tomorrow will be um, Arts and Crafts Day. Actually,
Oh
they are
yeah.
having a having like I was saying about making placards before, but they're
Mm.
doing a bunch more of that as a focused activity tomorrow. I don't know if you're hearing the podcast if it will still be going on then, but you can quickly Google it by just searching "trans kids deserve better" or one thing. That's what their social media is at, or transkidsdeservebetter.org also works. So from that website, they've described their protest like this. Our demands are simple. Healthcare. We deserve equal access to gender affirming healthcare. To delay care for a trans person is to deny it. We don't have time to wait. Secondly, we should be able to give informed consent to our own treatment, just as any cisgender young person already can. Dignity. We deserve to be treated with respect in all areas of life. We are human beings and should be protected from misgendering and dead naming at all times. Voice. We deserve to be heard in all matters which affect our lives. We should not be used as political pawns and must not be made a spectacle for the benefit of politics or the press. So yeah, I mean, there's an enormous amount of hatred for Wes Streeting down at this protest. I don't know if you know this name, but basically, like when when Margaret Thatcher made Tony Blair in a like scooped the goop out of a vat and poured it
Yeah.
into a special neoliberal ghoul press, right? There was a bunch of goop left over. So then they made Keir Starmer, right, a little while like,
Mm.
right, and like these processes they never improve with time, right? The goop
No,
it can
no.
only get worse, and so there was not after making Blair and then Starmer and probably David Cameron as well. There was not very much goop left, and I imagine they probably had to dilute it with something. And that's when they made Wes Streeting, and they but like he came out kind of funny. Um, and so he is now the the new Labour government's health minister. And so the ban on puberty blockers for young trans people that's just come in is it's him directly, right? Like this guy is such an evil fucking ghoul, and like
Yeah.
I really reserve like using like evil for an individual person because I do
Mm.
believe that evil is like an emergent thing that comes from systems.
Yeah,
I really
yeah,
believe
yeah.
that. At the same time, there are like stories about this motherfucker like he is so he is so entrenched in like neoliberal politics that there's a story about him and his like peers hearing about someone voting left within the party within
Mm.
labor on an issue and like banging their knives on the table. They were at some fancy dinner banging their knives on the table and chanting traitor traitor over and over again. Like this guy is such
Yeah.
a weird little worm. Like he's also talked about like using AI to improve the NHS, like using
Oh
Chat
yeah.
GPT to cut down wait times, this kind of stuff. Like he's talked about, and he does it all with like the worst kind of smug, like you know
Yeah.
when like a neoliberal apparatchik is really smug, right? So like he
Mm.
insists that when he is pushing for like privatization of the NHS, that's to help poor people. Like he's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I care about poor people having healthcare, so I don't want them to have to wait. And so we should rely on private services more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Obviously, why do you hate poor people? And I'm just like, obviously everyone is just like, the NHS is free, bro. Like you
Yeah.
just give more money to the NHS. And then like, are you
Yeah, yeah.
kidding me now?
We absolutely have the
Um,
same thing happening down here as well with
yeah.
our version of the like the shitty mold man,
Yeah.
David Seymour, who is, yeah, like it's the exact same thing. And it's like you say, like the system is evil, and while it's easy to look at people and go like this person is evil, like it's like the whole thing like, oh yeah, if someone went back in time and killed baby Hitler, someone else would have like someone else would have
Sure.
responded to the same things that created Hitler, and they would, there
Yeah,
would be
yeah,
someone to
yeah.
fill that gap. But also, it's amazing to look back and see how certain people are just like uniquely suited to picking, to putting on that evil mantle, right? Like there's some people where it's just like, damn, like a real combination of factors really made you like the worst you could be, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's like wild to look at government policy develop over years and be like, oh, this person was here for that. They did this, they did that, and whether it's like Margaret Thatcher or
Exactly.
like something like that, where it's just like, you really got to wonder, like, if this person hadn't been involved, how
No, I
differently
mean,
would have this
yeah,
panned out,
like everyone is responding to their society and their material conditions,
Mm,
especially politicians. And at the same time, like Ronald Reagan is the reason that
yeah,
like like you are unemployed but can only get like a gig economy, like 0 hours shit, and it's
yeah,
stressing you out so much that you're having a mental health crisis, but there are no mental health services available. Like
yeah,
he's the reason for that too, and he's the reason that like if there were services available, all of them would be to just like put you in a psych ward. And he's the
yeah,
reason that if you try and call for help when you're having a mental health crisis because you can't get any fucking work because of like the cops will just show up and shoot your dog. Like he is the reason for literally all of these things.
yeah, yeah,
And it's like maybe maybe you go back and you just like tell Ronald Reagan to keep stick to acting, but just like and maybe then it would just be like, okay, it would be five guys who are responsible
yeah,
for
yeah,
all
yeah.
those things instead of that one guy happened to be so focusedly evil. But like,
Yeah, yeah. So
anyway,
if you really want to go back in time, you can't just stop at Reagan. You have to take out this. It's almost like it's like a video game or something like that. Like Reagan's only like level one. You gotta like, every time you fire up that time machine, you gotta you gotta perform another
yeah.
series of hitman like escapades to save democracy.
Yeah.
But,
Anyway, so there's a lot of hatred for Wes Streeting was the point I was getting at. There's a lot of
yeah, yeah.
hatred for this simulacra of a facsimile of a copy of a pretend fake man of a fucking what's the tulpa? He's a tulpa. That's what I always say,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
The Twin
yeah.
Peaks thing. He's literally a tulpa.
I
Um,
was like, it's so interesting seeing like tulpas become like such a thing that people use a lot now because I was terrified of tulpas as a child. I don't know if I've ever talked about this, which is like
no, I don't think
a,
so.
a
I think
very
they're a
weird
scary
thing.
concept.
Yeah, my so one of my grandmas was like obsessed with those books that you would get and it would be like unexplained phenomenon or whatever like that. And I think Reader's Digest used to put them out, and there was one in particular. There was one I remember. There was that just had this section about tulpas, and it talked about how they were manifested by like the willpower of these monks, but then over time they could become like quite twisted and evil. And there was like a couple of like
Yeah, that's
paragraphs
Wes Streeting.
describing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a bunch of paragraphs describing like how these people had been haunted by these tulpas that they had created and how they had like ruined their life and all this shit. And I was just like I don't know, like uniquely terrifying. And I thought it
Yeah.
was like one of those like super niche things that I'd never hear about again. And then yeah, everyone on all the podcasts starts calling people tulpas and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, my tulpa is
Yeah.
back.
Oh
Um,
no. Um, well, Wes Streeting unfortunately is real and he can hurt you.
oh
So
damn.
like
Yeah.
so when I was making the placards, actually, one of the great ones that one of the kids came up with was, "Hey, Streeting, leave trans kids alone."
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was like, "Oh, these kids know Pink Floyd." It was the opposite of hearing a Roblox tantrum. Actually, it was like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
yeah.
I'm not ancient. I'm
I
not just
understand that
crumbling to dust."
reference. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so like Streeting is responsible for the puberty blockers ban, which like it can't be said often enough. Like trans kids are trying to get onto a medication which will pause puberty until they can
Yeah.
get to age 18, where they can get full HRT to go through the puberty,
Which
like
is like
the puberty that's correct to them. But puberty
it's
blockers
fine. Yeah.
is just like, firstly, like there's so much discussion which is always like it's experimental, it's dangerous, it's whatever. And it's like it's not experimental. Hormone blockers have been used for fucking forever for
Yeah.
all sorts of things, right? Like my I have a family member who has prostate cancer right now, and like so I know that he will be on one of the same medications that I have taken because one of
Mm.
the things that gets used is a testosterone blocker, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah. And
this
it's
kind of
like
thing,
they
right?
use it for like there's like like child gymnasts will use them. Fucking
Right.
like little like choir boys will use them. It's like this like
Yeah.
weird thing where
But there's
it's
also
like
like cis kids sometimes go through like precocious puberty where they're like
yeah,
just
yeah,
too
yeah.
young to be starting puberty and doctors put them onto puberty blockers
Yeah,
to
yeah.
stop
I
them
had
from
a
going
friend
through that.
growing up, a young girl that was the same thing, like started
Mm-hmm.
going through puberty when she was like 7 or 8 or something like that. And, like they just put her
Mm-hmm.
on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there's so many just normal uses for this that is like entirely, it's like entirely fine. It's so
Yeah.
not an issue. But
Yeah, so I mean
mm,
that's the first thing is that it's not experimental. It's been used and is used in so many cases and has been used for such a long time. But the other thing is that like actually what you're talking about is you're talking about half of the medication that trans kids actually really want,
mm,
right? Because if you're talking about teenagers who want to go through, if I were their age, right, and I
yeah,
wanted to transition, like I would not want to just not have testosterone and just be like
yeah,
devoid of hormones. I would want to have estrogen, and vice versa for trans masc teenagers.
yeah, yeah,
And so that's frustrating. Like it's frustrating that like the ask isn't even the full thing. It's like the ask is for like half of the medication, really, but like even that's being denied. I was talking to one of these kids, and it was utterly heartbreaking. Like they were telling me about when the ban came in and they received a letter just saying that they're just gonna be, just their medication's just gonna be stopped, right?
yeah,
And they were saying that like doing this occupation has done something for them. It has kind of
mm,
it's kind of felt a bit like the opposite of that crushing moment is like being around community and being like working with like solidarity, working together,
mm,
trying to like change things. But yeah, it's just fucking awful. Like it's such an unimaginable thing to be. I mean, I say unimaginable just because I wasn't like aware that I was trans and couldn't like understand those feelings in that way when I was that
yeah,
age. But like obviously like it's just an actual experience that so many people are going through
mm,
because of this shit is like they know who they are so passionately, so completely, and they're just being forced to go through like an unimaginable body horror of their body developing in the wrong way.
yeah,
It's hideous. But that's about healthcare, which is one of the demands like that the group is like fighting for and pushing towards, which is why they occupied NHS England before. Um, they also, speaking of healthcare and speaking of the Tulpa Wes streeting, they have a parallel action that's going on at the moment. They didn't fully explain it to me. They were like, we're doing this coffin thing. And I was like, you're doing coffin flop? No. We're doing this coffin thing. Um, I thought they were saying they were going to do a die-in, right? But then I saw they had these little like paper cutout coffins, and they're going to be
okay.
doing some of this, I think, tomorrow with the Arts and Crafts Day, where they're like writing slogans and stuff and decorating these little paper coffins, folding them up, and they're taking them to Wes Streeting's like MP office, like his residency,
Oh, yeah.
and leaving them outside. And so when I got back to my girlfriend's, I was looking on their Instagram and I saw a picture of just one of these coffins on its own outside. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I guess they're doing like a proof of concept of what it's gonna. They've done one coffin and they're gonna come back with the rest of them later or something. And then I checked today, right, and it's the next day along in the occupation, and there's two coffins this time. And I'm like,
Uh,
oh, I see what they're doing is like they're doing like every day that you wait,
mm,
like you're killing trans kids, which
yeah,
is like grim, but is such a powerful message.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, that stuff, as I say, is all the healthcare related stuff, but they are obviously outside the Department of Education at the moment, and that's
Yeah.
because like they're kids, right? They're in school. That's their relevant context. That's where they're experiencing the social
Mm,
conditions that they're experiencing. So what can the Department of Education do differently? Well, I think that a lot of Americans in our audience will already be familiar with the kinds of ways that like education departments can be shit to trans kids.
yeah.
We aren't Texas, right? Like we don't have some kind of situation where parents are being reported for child abuse because they're
Yeah.
supportive of trans kids, but like there are no protections on dead naming,
Yeah.
misgendering. Their students are regularly like outed, right? Like against their will.
Mm,
As like there's reporting back to parents if they have been using a different name at school. There's all
yeah.
this stuff that's been like forced through by
Yeah.
discourses by like frankly by abusive parents who like want to
Hmm.
control and stop trans kids from being
Yeah.
themselves. Um, or they're afraid that that might happen to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have pushed these discourses through, and like the Labour government we have is entirely sympathetic to it. So they've listened and they've followed through on it where the Tory government was already doing it, and so like that is what they're I think protesting most directly. But like
Mm,
people outside the UK may remember 2 years ago there was a teenager called Brianna Jai. Um,
mm.
who was stabbed to death by two of her classmates after a very long period of transphobic bullying. Like it was very well known that like all the other kids were giving her shit for being a trans girl, and um, the teachers didn't do anything, and then she was murdered, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, sorry, just a second. I'm just really upsets
It's
me.
okay.
And so, I think another thing that they're obviously trying to push to change is that like there should be meaningful safeguarding, right? Where there's all this discussion about safeguarding that's like that is a bastardized and evil version of this conversation, that they're talking about safeguarding like we should be safeguarding by telling parents that your kid
Yeah.
is trans. And it's like, no, you need to be safeguarding like if you see people being like violent to a kid because
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
trans, like fucking
Mhm.
do something
Yeah.
ridiculous. So yeah, so I'm more power to them. That's an ongoing occupation. I've heard it directly from them. They intend to keep it going as long as they possibly can. Schools are about to let back in the UK, which is why they've done it now. Like they're basically just doing it right before schools are going to be back in, so
Mhm.
that there's like this ongoing thing that they're not in school and they're withholding. They're on strike essentially. It's very similar
Yeah.
to the climate strike, school strike for climate strategy. Solidarity to them, and if more comes of it, you'll be hearing about it. And
Yeah.
if this group does more stuff, which I'm so sure they will, because these kids are amazing, you'll be hearing about that too. But Tim, why don't you tell us about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in Ukraine?
I'm so glad that you said that out loud because even though I have the note about how to pronounce Zaporizhzhia, um, I was gonna say something. Even I was gonna say it differently to that. Um, so, fire extinguished at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after fears of damage to nuclear reactors. So, some of you might have already seen this in the news, but 2 weeks ago, a fire broke out at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, which is currently under Russian occupation. The fire was in one of the plant's cooling towers. So, Ukrainian President Zelensky said on Twitter while the fire was ongoing that we have recorded from Nikopol that the Russian occupiers have started a fire on the territory of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Currently, radiation levels are within norm. However, as long as the Russian terrorists maintain control over the nuclear plant, the situation is not and cannot be normal. Multiple explosions were reported at the plant, which is not operational but needs to maintain a basic function to keep the nuclear material stable. From an article by ABC, Australian ABC, a team from the International Atomic Energy Agency heard the explosions and were told by the Russian management of the plant that a drone had struck one of the plant's two cooling towers. The IAEA said that there was no radioactive material affected by the fire. Zaporizhzhia has been occupied by Russia since the invasion began in 2022. This fire occurred at the same time that Ukraine has begun offensive military operations into Russia. Ukrainian authorities reported unofficial information that the Russian forces operating the plant had set a fire inside the cooling tower deliberately, which is interesting.
Mm.
Obviously, there's like so much going on that it's like, like who knows what's happening there, but it's definitely like it's wild. So like they said, it's not an active energy production, but the whole thing with nuclear plants is that even when they're wound down, there's certain processes to keep the cores kind of safe and everything like that. And it's even when they're totally turning them off, it's not something you can just flick off immediately. It's a very
No,
slow
exactly.
cycling
Yeah.
down, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, even though they're not currently using it because of the invasion, it's still like super dangerous. And I mean, when we look at, like a lot of, yeah, I mean, a lot of nuclear events in the past, it's been because, yeah, because they haven't been able to, or they've been disrupted during, like closing down periods, or like
Mm-hmm.
even just like weren't a like something happened to the to the process without the kind of like the shutdown procedures and stuff in play. So
Yeah,
it's like
as
super
Chernobyl,
dangerous. Like,
they were doing a
yeah,
test where they
exactly.
were
Yeah,
powering it fully down and then powering it back up again when Chernobyl happened.
yeah.
Um,
So
this is
it's not like
obviously
it has
like
to be like all going and or operating and stuff to be dangerous. Like it's still like absolutely like so dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. And this is like this is one of those places where detailed reporting is so important because it's obviously a place where there's a ton of like information and counter information being traded back and forth.
Mm.
Literally, you got Ukraine and Russia trading blame for like why has this happened, and it's like the Russian occupiers who run the plant being like it was hit by drones, and it's like, what are you saying? Ukraine just like tried to like blow up their own nuclear plant? Like that doesn't make any
Mm.
fucking sense. But at the same time, it's like does it make that much sense that like the Russians who are like running the plant would try to cause that
Yeah, yeah.
disaster on top, in a place that they're right on top of? Like it's we can't know for sure right now. It could just be that there was just some kind of accident, but at the same time, yeah, like there I saw this absolutely like such a such a like classic moment of what's the word, oscent, right? Like such a classic oscent moment where someone on Twitter was being like could have got an aerial photo and was like was replying to Zelensky, and they
Mm.
were like the cooling tower and like circle there is nowhere near the reactor, there's no danger whatsoever, and it was just like there's no danger of the fire getting to the reactor, like well
Mm.
done, you get a trophy, but like we need the cooling tower to
Yeah,
stop it. Like
exactly. It's like, do
the
you think that
exact
is there for
thing,
fun?
like the cooling tower is keeping like the radioactive shit cool, like stopping
Yeah.
it doing that thing it does when it's not kept cool,
Yeah,
like
yeah. Some of those guys
yeah.
just don't get it. But I mean, and there's also the possibility, what is it? Hanlon's razor, never attribute to malice, that which is adequately explained by
Right,
stupidity.
yeah.
Like these are people that, it's like, I mean, if we've seen anything from what's happening in Gaza with like Israel and stuff like that, like the IDF are doing like incredibly stupid shit all the time. And I would imagine that there's, like a lot of that stuff happens in like with Russia as well. Like they're probably just like who fucking knows? Maybe it wasn't, maybe it was someone just fucking around and they did something stupid because they're not power plant guys, they're army guys.
My
It's like,
yeah, my personal theory I'm going to start pushing is that it was an OSINT guy who was
yeah, yeah,
flying a
exactly.
drone to try and record pictures, and he just flew it into the cooling tower.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, like fucking, I mean, you have to account for like not only is this soldiers running
Yeah.
a power plant because they're occupying it, like maybe they've got in other people in the meantime. I don't
Mm.
know. I don't know if Russia like can transport people through an active war zone to there or whatever, but like not only is it soldiers doing it, but like most modern militaries employ a lot of contractors, so it's not even like
Yeah, yeah.
soldiers from that army necessarily. Like it could just be some guys who are just like in a pay to play militia essentially, who've been like who've just been sitting in this nuclear plant for a couple of years trying
Yeah.
to now be nuclear scientists. Like
Yeah, yeah. There could be like all kinds of stuff going on there. It's pretty hard to speculate. And I think it is kind of frustrating seeing a lot of the like, yeah, a lot of those accounts on Twitter like give really definitive answers about what is going on, where it's like, man, like, like you're just some guy with Google Maps. Like, chill the fuck out. Um,
yeah, there's a
yeah.
very obvious kind of emotionally resonant story here, which is like, well, Ukraine is attacking Russia now, like on Russian territory, and so the Russians who control this plant are like, don't do it, or we'll do this thing, and it's like, yeah, maybe, maybe, but we can't be saying that. Like, that's not, we don't know that's true.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I will see how that goes. Hopefully, like, I mean, for everyone in I was gonna say everyone in the conflict, but everyone in fucking Europe, hopefully nothing bad really happens there. Because yeah, obviously we all know how Chernobyl went. And yeah, we don't need
Yeah.
Chernobyl too. We don't need to be in 20 years time talking about Zaporizhzhia in the same way that we talk about Chernobyl. No one needs that.
No one can. Chernobyl's way easier to say.
I know, yeah, yeah, yeah. But is that only because
That's true.
Chernobyl
We
is
got
such a big story,
practice.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, anyway, what about there's still a lot of rioting and stuff going on over there in old Blighty. Why don't you
Well, I
Give
mean,
us a little bit more about that.
sure. I'll tell you about the aftermath of this stuff. I want to clarify, like, things have quieted down. I think
Mm,
there is a lot of tension. There's a lot of fear in, especially in like communities of color,
yeah.
in the UK at the moment about like what will happen next. There are like ongoing attempts by the far right to like organize more stuff. But
Mm,
like, so yeah, people who caught our last episode, we were talking about the racist riots. I talked about there was a stabbing, and this was used as the excuse to like kick off massive far right riots across primarily the north of England, but kind of all around the country. Didn't really happen that much in Scotland, and there have been some efforts to try to like preemptively organize against the possibility of that happening in Scotland. Recently as well. But yeah, I just wanted to give an update on basically what's been going on since then. There were massive anti-fascist protests, just like showing up in such enormous numbers that like it was impossible for the fascists to really show up. Like it's a lot of the fascists were trying to pass this off as like we tricked them. Haha, it's so funny. They're so gullible. We made them all
mm.
show up and prepare for us, but actually we never intended to. And it's like, no, like you're like fascists are definitionally a bunch of pussies. Like
Yeah.
it's
I've seen
kind of the
similar
thing
stuff
they
like
do.
that before. Yeah. Where they'll try and spin it as like a win or something like that. Like yeah. Mm, absolutely. There was with a lot of the Gaza protests over here, Destiny Church were doing that a lot where they would change, like there was twice I think they changed the date of their kind of like pro-Israel rallies like last minute,
Mm,
and then we were like, look, nobody showed up to challenge us because they were all scared. It's just kind of like, well, actually no, you guys like, changed the date, like very last minute, and
yeah.
there was a pro Palestine rally the day before that was like, thousands of people were there, and you guys have a couple of dozen, so you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I think that it's very cool. We've seen like massive anti-fascist turnout, and we've seen it around the country, not just in London, although London was the biggest turnouts of anti-fascist protesting. I have some thoughts on that in a second, but it was, like I say, all around the country as well, and also in London. In London, there weren't far right riots to begin with, so like that's
Mm,
another thing about that. There's massive anti-fash numbers, not really any fash. I'll talk about stand up to racism in a second, but but something that's been commented on is that like many of the biggest agitators among the far right like have now been arrested, and it's kind of um what I'm trying to say here, like uh the take is going around that like there are basically like 500 or so actually committed like neo-Nazi guys who were like
mm,
the guys who were doing the rioting, and it was such a flash in the pan because like they did it and then they were just arrested. But I think that take is incomplete, and I think Mule and I might do a discussion episode in the coming weeks about like the alienation of working class communities in the UK. But I think that take is kind of incomplete because yes, I'm sure that like a lot of the guys who are the most like ready to go set fire to a refugee camp or hotel or whatever
mm,
at any excuse, I'm sure those guys did do their best to do that and get themselves arrested. And so like they did sort of expose themselves in that way. But
yeah.
like these riots were bigger than that. They weren't
Mm,
just 500 people in total across the whole country. There were more people. And
yeah.
like I think that there's the and this would be the kind of conversation Mule and I will probably have in coming weeks, but like there is such a disconnect between the left, which is so much of like the activist left is situated in London and populous in London, and so much of like where the working class is not in London, and like loads of like underserved poor communities. Like obviously like there are so many working class and poor people in London, but
Yeah.
like the working class of the UK is so vulnerable to fash
Mm,
ideas because like the left is just like in a like we hate saying this, but they are in a bubble. Like we are in a bubble, and like it's a serious problem here.
Yeah.
So kind of leading off of that, a lot of the protests that have been uh organized, like anti-fascist protests, have been
Mm.
organized under the banner of stand up to racism. This
Yeah.
again is something that Mule is going to want to like go on and on about for literal hours. But
Mm.
stand up to racism is a front group for the Socialist Workers Party. Now, the Socialist Workers
Oh yeah.
Party, yeah, the SWP
Mm.
is like kind of notorious because like people love to cite that they suck because they have defended people who have sexually assaulted people in their party. That is a good reason to explain that they suck, but like their tactic as a vanguardist party is like kind of the structural reason they suck, right?
Yeah.
Like what they do is they attach themselves to protests and protest movements, and like they show up
Mm.
and then take a bunch of pictures, and they get the permits to have a stall somewhere. They'll have like a stall at Trans Pride, and they'll like print off a bunch of placards with like their slogans and logos and stuff on, and then everyone's carrying a placard, like they give them out for free, and then everyone's carrying a stand up to racism placard, and it's a stand up to
Mm.
racism event or whatever. And then they get to say, look how many people support
Yeah.
and organize with the SWP. And it's like, well, no, they don't. Like they were not consciously, at any point
Yeah. Yeah.
interacting with the SWP here. Like you kind of effectively tricked people into that. And that,
Yeah.
like that is not as a single action worse than their other problems, but like that as their whole strategy is just kind of slimy, and like it's a reason that people get really, really
And
pissed
it's
off
just
with them.
like you're not building any kind of like meaning, like you're not building any meaningful power or like support base or anything doing that, right? Like you're just like you're not
Mm.
achieving anything aside from photo ops, right? Like
Yeah, I mean
yeah.
they've been called like cliquey or even culty before, and like
Mm.
and I kind of see that because like
Yeah.
it's again, I would reserve some of this for discussing with Mule, but like there's a long history of like the British left having a lot of Trotskyites
Oh yeah.
in our like Marxist tradition. Like of the flavors of Marxist you can be, we just have a lot of Trotskyites. And for those
Mm.
who don't know, like we don't fuck with like factionalism here on Red Planet. We're not here about like fighting over your ideological tendency.
Mm.
But ideological tendencies still exist, and different
Yeah.
people have different opinions about how to do the revolution. And Trotskyites, like their opinion about how to do the revolution is well-meaning but quite misguided. Like they think
Mm.
that you
Selling newspapers.
sell newspapers, right, and this
Yeah.
gets propaganda out and money in, and then you have a sustainable cycle that's going around to like blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And it's like, so oh god, I'm going on such a tangent now, but like if you
No, it's
were to
fine.
update this materially to today, like actually selling something like a podcast would be much
Mm.
more like much more akin to like what made that part of the Bolshevik operation worthwhile and like
Yeah.
valuable at the time, was that like newspapers and mass printed things were a relatively new thing that people
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
excited about. Like people were excited about receiving newspapers and pamphlets and shit and sharing political ideas through this like mass communication technology that was the like relatively new thing, having printed like mass printed stuff in the same way that the internet is now.
Mm.
But even then, just saying that like even then, if you said we're going to update it to modern technologies, and actually like the new Trotskyite way to do things is to like sell a podcast, right?
Yeah.
Like on Red Planet, we're under no pretensions that like by joining our Patreon, please join our Patreon, patreon.com/red_planet. By doing that, you are funding the revolution.
Mm.
I'll just repeat myself. By doing that, you are funding the revolution. No, we are not under any pretensions that that's the case, right? And like we our informational infrastructure, what we're doing on the show is like we give a platform to activists and organizers to talk about what they do, inspire other people to do the same thing. And also like because our audience are activists and organizers, then they know about each other and they can link up and be aware of stuff. And it's, it's useful in that way, right? But the Trotskyite model is that like you're getting propaganda out and money in, and this is the thing. But like what you end up funding isn't the revolution with Trotskyites, it's the newspapers. Like you're
Yeah.
just giving them just enough money to keep on printing more newspapers. all of that was a very long tear about Trotskyites. But the thing about the SWP putting up front organizations is that like the SWP does suck, and it's worth disagreeing with them, and it's worth like telling people the way that they suck. Also, like there is this very, I think, ineffective strategy that you get from people who hate them. And like I think they suck. Like I do think they suck. I also think that like organizing as many leftist things together as possible to try to like, you know, all revolutions are pluralist, right?
Yeah.
But like if I'm at a protest, if I'm at say like trans pride and there's a stall for the SWP, I'm like, fuck off out of here. Like no one wants you here, right? If I'm an anti-fascist thing and they're handing out the placards that like say generic kind of like migrants welcome here, we hate
Yeah.
Tommy Robinson or whatever, like absolutely, like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will like I will like take one of these placards and then I'll rip off the SWP Center for Racism
Yeah. Yeah.
branding and just carry the placard. And this is
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
like I and everyone else I know does, is just rip off that's like the branding stuff and still have the placard. But there's this very like I think unproductive attitude where people say that event is organized by this group. This group is an SWP front. Don't bother
Yeah.
going. Don't give
Oh
them
yeah.
the attention. Don't give them the power or whatever. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like you need to have more like literacy for protests, for
Mm.
actions, for organizing, for mobilizing than this. You can't just be like, this group sucks, so don't do it. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
if it's just your local thing and it's the nearest thing, and you know that you're not going to go to a more tactically relevant place where
Yeah.
people need the numbers, you're just going to go to your local thing, go to your local thing. And it
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
fucking matter
Absolutely.
at all that it's organized by them. And as I say, rip off the branding. Just go and then rip off the branding. It doesn't matter. If you want to go where you know are going to make the most impact, figure out where that is and go to there. And if that place is, you know, that event is all organized by, you know, Stand Up to Racism as well, doesn't fucking matter, because you're doing it to show up to stop like communities of color from being under
Yeah.
attack from fascists. Like it doesn't fucking matter that they're trying to like the you know SUTR SWP are trying to like put their branding on it. Just go and make up the numbers, and that's a good thing to be doing.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah. It's. I mean,
um
it's better to be doing it than to not. Like they would have to. They would. They would have to be actively doing some pretty terrible stuff. You know, like
no,
you do get
exactly.
like yeah to be able to just to say that it's better to stay at home than to go. So
Yeah, but
yeah
I think that just a final point on that is like one of the biggest problems in what they do is their ineffectiveness and the fact that they're just trying to slap their branding onto everyone else's
yeah.
organizing.
Mm.
If you want to do something that's counter to that, it's not show up at their protest. It's
Mm.
show up at their protest, right? And be organizing in your community and strengthening your community so that your
Yeah.
community is more anti-fascist, like
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
sure that your community is more ready to actually fight back against fasci shit. And then, you know, maybe next time your community will organize its own counter demo, and Stand Up to Racism will be like, hey, we're going to organize a counter demo, and no one will go because there will already be a bigger one, you know?
Yeah. Or even
If you
just
want to
like
get
to
rid of
have
it.
like another significant presence there if you have organized a group or whatever, just
Yeah.
like another group that is there that is not affiliated and doesn't have their sides and all this kind of stuff, just to show that there's
Yeah.
more than just them, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always, you know, when it comes to the left, it's always just like, it's always just do your own thing bigger and better. So there is more revolutionary activity going on rather than wasting yours and everyone's time trying to take
Yeah.
out or like, you know, stop or whatever, like another, yeah, unless they're like actively, as you say, like doing something with
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's like really bad. But yeah, that's just my general update on the riot situation. Like it's tense. People of color here are like feeling that tension. I think that you know, I heard from someone a bit ago about like a community meeting at a mosque where they'd kind of invited like a lot of like white community members to attend
Mm.
the mosque meeting, and they'd invited police as well, and like been like, oh, the police are doing such a great job, which was absolutely sickening. And it was very clear that like that decision had been made to try to like ease the feelings of white people in the community,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like and kind of strengthen those relations instead of talking about how to fight against the fascists. And like, it was much more like trying to reduce the Islamophobia by making friends with the white people than it was like trying to reduce the
Yeah.
Islamophobia by everyone agree we're going to kick the shit out of the Islamophobes if they
Yeah,
try
yeah,
and
yeah,
fuck
yeah,
with, which I think would obviously be the more productive way to stop fascism. But
yeah.
but yeah, so I mean, it's it's a place where I think there are so many opportunities for the left to be doing better right now. Um, and currently they aren't, but there's an uneasy piece right this second, and we'll see if more comes of it. And as I said a few times now, like Mule and I will probably have a discussion episode. Maybe Tim will be here and we'll just be getting Tim to sit down and get educated on the UK,
Yeah.
where we'll talk about the alienation of the working class in England. But for now, a last news story, Tim. Can you tell us about Thailand?
Yeah, cool. So this is another kind of like evolving story there at the moment. So yeah, so Thailand's top court dissolves Progressive Move Party, blocking them from taking power after victory. So Thailand just had an election. One party won, like overwhelmingly so, and they have a court, a constitutional court, and this constitutional court like notably quite conservative. It's basically when because they had like the monarchy was in control. It's kind of like what happened in Russia, right? There's like the monarchy was in control, and then people were like, we want more democracy. So they're like, okay, we're gonna introduce like like a parliament and stuff, but the monarchy will still have this role where they can like veto certain things and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually they were like, okay, cool. Well, we're still going to have the monarchy, but we're actually going to replace the authority of the monarchy with this constitutional court. And when they did that, they just basically set it up as like a bunch of conservative pro monarchy kind of people in control of the court, which has gone down terribly with the actual kind of like progressive and like working class kind of communities in Thailand, because they're like, well, so this is just like, King 2, but it's 9 guys um doing all the same things. And so Thailand has like actually had like a pretty rocky history with this kind of thing in the past, because even before this constitutional court, the king would always kind of do the same stuff anyway. So yeah, so in the last 2 decades in Thailand, they've had these courts have ousted 4 prime ministers and dissolved 3 of the major political parties. So basically these courts just being like, actually, no, like this win is too progressive. And they often will say stuff like that. They'll say like, oh, these are some good ideas, but we're just working slowly towards it. They're a bit too far, like this kind of thing or whatever. um and so yeah, because the constitutional court is kind of obviously in favor of, well, obviously supported by the monarchy and all this kind of stuff, it means that they're not really kind of, yeah, they're not really on the side of the working people when it comes to a lot of issues, particularly for like, there's like a lot of workers' rights stuff, but there's also just like these weird laws. One that keeps coming up and one that has been like a persistent thing, especially with the last couple of elections, is the less, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's like the lese majesty law, which is a law that they have that is basically um, prevents, well, it's like it criminalizes an insult to the monarchy, but it's basically just like worded very simply like that, which means that it has just like a gigantic range of interpretations, which could be anything from like people making like graffiti or like a meme about the king, to literally like people that have political positions that like because there have been like the guy that led the party that they've just dissolved, and like others in the past, progressive figures being like, we should actually get rid of the monarchy, like we should wrap that up, we should end it, like it's now not, we've got this other court anyway, we should just get rid of the monarchy. And that's considered an insult to the monarchy, right? So that's illegal to do that. You can go to jail for saying that. All kinds of things just like that can be counted as that. So that's one of the big things that they've used to kind of silence dissent and even attack attack politicians. But so back on August the 7th, they dissolved the Move Forward Party. And not only did they dissolve it, but they banned its leader from running for office for 10 years. So, which, like obviously they won this election. So people are outraged because they're like, damn, why are we voting for all these things that we want, these parties, these politicians, if they're just going to, shut it down? So like a lot of people are losing faith in their whole judicial system because they're like, these votes are like, voting is unnecessary, like it's a waste of time. They're calling it like a double lock democracy, where it's like like the people vote for one thing, and then like this kind of like administration, this the constitutional courts that often work in coordination with the military will just override anything if it doesn't agree, if they don't agree with with this new party or anything like that. There's been so many coups in Thailand. Like, I'm not sure exactly how many in total, but just like, yeah, there's a whole bunch. And it's pretty wild. So obviously this has stoked people to become more, I guess, like radicalized outside of that system as well. There's like a lot more, like there's quite a lot of protests every time this happens. It builds up that kind of like anger and that lack of faith in the system. So um there have been, aside from like these kind of like grassroots movements, there have been a lot of other parties as well, not just the Move Forward Party, that have kind of taken on more radical stances about getting rid of the monarchy and all this kind of stuff. And they all get like, like they all get discovered to have been like corrupt or something like that. Like something will come up that will just mean that like, oh, okay, now another guy banned from participating for 10 years, another whatever. Like this is the Move Forward are the 34th political party to be dissolved by this court since 2006. So
Jesus
that's like not
Christ.
even 20 years. It's wild. So yeah, so Peter Limjaroenrat, whose Move Forward Party were the one that won. They like, so he's basically come out and said, he's like, yeah, they're using this military system and the legal system and military coups to undermine the actual kind of like the democratic process. And so the remaining MPs that haven't been banned, whatever, have regrouped under a new party called the People's Party. But so Peter and the executive committee are totally banned for a decade. And so he's told them, he's like, this is going to get worse. Like the legal threats against us are going to get worse. He said in a statement that he said, they're coming for us. They're exterminating us. They're not going to compromise, and they're not here to find consensus. And he's right. They're not looking for, like there's nothing they could do that they'll be like, okay, cool, this is an acceptable form of your party or anything like that. They're just going to keep whittling it away until it's nothing. So so a lot of the stuff that they promised that really, I guess, kind of upset the Constitutional Court was they wanted to put strict controls on how the military was involved in politics. They wanted to break up some monopolies that kind of control the Thai economy. And they wanted to get rid of, well, they wanted to do a reform of the lèse majesty law. So they wanted to reform it so that it wasn't so broadly, couldn't be so broadly
I think
applied,
they should
right?
make it illegal to not insult the king.
Yeah. So obviously this was like hugely popular across like like a huge cross section of Thai people. But but the military royalists found them to be uniquely kind of I guess dangerous. Which I mean, and they were right. Like they won the election, you know. So when they did win the election, they immediately blocked it, and then yeah, and they accused them of trying to overthrow the monarchy and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I mean, like that would be based, but it didn't seem like that was their plan, you know, like, or at least not at this point. Um, and yeah, so a lot of academics and legal scholars in Thailand and actually all around Indonesia and stuff have said like this is, you know, like that you can't actually do this, right? Like you can't, like this is unconstitutional, all this kind of stuff, and they just don't really. I don't know, like it hasn't changed anything at all. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see this evolve. I actually haven't seen many people in the West reporting on this. I only know about it because a friend of mine who does a lot of work with a lot of like Indonesian labor, like in New Zealand, like a lot of, because we get a lot of workers that come over from there. Um, yeah, he wrote a tweet about it, and he's like, "This is wild. If this was happening in any other country, there'd be like an intervention or something, right? Like, you know, like, well, like they would be banging the drums for some kind of like, you know, safeguarding democracy or something like
Yeah,
that."
absolutely.
And yeah, so it's pretty wild, especially for us down here in the Pacific, because Thailand is like very close. I feel like there's stuff going on there. We'll try and keep tabs on it as it develops. Yeah, because it seems like it's one of those other things, right? Like it's it is similar to the things that led up to like, yeah, like the Russian Revolution and other places where it's like the working class people are losing faith in the established system. So
Yeah.
if people from the Move Forward Party and, you know, other groups or whatever like that can establish, like, I mean, they already have the faith of the people, right? And that's a huge part of
Yeah.
building dual power and stuff,
I
right?
mean,
But
like the judicial system is one of the biggest, like in terms of like people's desire for revolution, like
mm,
faith that justice will be meted out fairly by whatever power is in place, like
yeah,
is such a crucial one.
yeah. So we'll see. Hopefully it, you know, they can like take advantage of that opportunity. Things have gotten pretty bloody in Thailand in the past with military coups, so hopefully it doesn't come to that. Um, but yeah, it would be amazing to see a more progressive government in Thailand, because yeah, they have been kind of like under conservative capture for a long time. Um, and yeah, we would love to
Yeah.
see it. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's. Have you got any thoughts on that one?
I think you've said it all really.
Hmm.
I will keep an eye on it and yeah, like solidarity to the people of Thailand right now and hopefully things progress to a better situation.
Hope so.
That's our last news story.
Hmm.
So a quick reminder that it's the viewers and particularly the Patreon supporting viewers and listeners of Red Planet who make the show possible. So go to patreon.com/red_planet to support the show. There are various different tiers you can support us on there. And yeah, please go check it out. So just a reminder before we move on to our main segment today. Keen-eyed and eared viewers and listeners of the show will notice that we only had one story about Palestine and Palestine related news this week, which was the Columbia University president resigning. And that's because the topic we're going to be talking about this week is global resistance to the Israeli genocide and to the American imperialist machine that makes it possible. We want to talk about like how it's going, I guess.
Hmm.
What the opportunities are, what people are currently doing, what maybe could be done, what the responses have been, what the situation it currently is in Palestine. And that's why we've been holding the Palestine news out of the news this week to keep it for the main discussion segment. Keen-eyed and eared viewers and listeners will also notice that we have no DJ Mule this week.
Hmm.
Um, and that's actually entirely related to the main segment because Mule has gone to Pal. No, because Mule has been organizing with an alternative pride block, basically. I'm sure he'll tell us all about it next week, but No Pride in Genocide Manchester have basically its main Manchester Pride this weekend. And Mule has been with the tenants union and with No Pride in Genocide Manchester organizing like counter protest, alternative pride stuff. They staged, I think, a die-in in front of the like interrupted the progress of the march, and like a bunch of people lay down in the street. I'm just looking at the video on Instagram now. Yeah, they had banners and like lay down to block the protest of it, and just like draw attention to the fact that corporate pride is like partnered with corporations like booking.com that are on the BDS list. And this is like the immediate stuff that they've done on the day to stop the progress of the protest, but they've been working for like weeks, maybe even months now, on like pressuring all of the like big names who are associated with Manchester like main corporate pride to like drop out. And it's actually worked. Like if people know Bimini, like dropped out because of the pressure. Like like there have been drag performers, there have been people who are like influencers and have some degree of clout, like dropped out and publicly announced dropping out because of the pressure that's been going on with this campaign. So yeah.
Yeah, it's great. We had a similar moment with that is No Pride in Prisons here years ago, which some friends of mine were involved with, where they were protesting the involvement of police in the Pride festivals up here, Pride festivities in general. And it was successful. It was really successful. They ended up kind of there's been a fork, you know, there's like corporate pride and now there's like more like grassroots pride. And
Nice.
but a lot of that was putting pressure on. There was a lot of organizations that the corporate pride is run by an organization where it's like you could literally just buy a rainbow tick. And it's like, so all these corporations where it's like, you know, like there was like, I think there was like those banks that wouldn't give you like a home loan. They wouldn't give home loans to queer couples. They would only recognize heterosexual, you know, relationships, sort of thing. And but then they had a rainbow tick, you know, just shit like
Jesus
that. But
Christ.
so they split it off and they ran the bootlicker cop, you know, kind of stuff. But
Sure.
yeah. Just like, but there's just this wild thing where I think it was like the reason it was so successful because I mean they were great at organizing and doing everything like that, but it was just like this thing where there was this entire community of people that have been, you know, pushed out by a lot of these corporations and, you know, like even and by the police themselves and everything like that. And there's like a lot of stuff where it was like a lot of the focus was how, you know, like trans women were getting put in men's prisons and all these kind of things
Yep.
like that. And so all these people were just kind of like, actually, yeah, like why are they here? Like, you know, like what's this about? Like why would we want them here?
Yeah,
Um
right.
yeah. And I think that the kind of like the queer and trans community down here is largely quite radical. Well,
Mm.
in Auckland, I would say more so than the Pride Festival in Wellington and, you know, some other cities is, I would say, not as radically focused. So it was kind of a slam dunk up here. And I think it really kind of set the scene for a lot of other follow-up protest movements. Like a lot of organizers from that went on to do other things and really kind
Mm.
of cut their teeth at that moment, which I think was really great to see, and to see a lot of these people pop up, you know,
Yeah, I think
in other
like
places and stuff.
we talked a little bit about pride when we were talking where we had a last discussion episode when we were talking about recuperation and détournement, right? Like
Yeah.
those forces, like that tug of war between like, is this radical or is this just like another commodity thing? And
Mm-hmm.
like pride is always such a crucial moment for within the imperial core countries, like what gets politically platformed, like what is
Yeah.
considered worth talking about publicly. And I think that, you know, you see like year on year, you see like more progress of like alternative prides, and like every group wants to do something to disrupt the main pride, and like I
Mm,
think that doing like a full alternative pride thing is maybe like the winning strategy,
yeah.
especially when you get together like a lot of groups who are all like, look, the pride march that we have going on, this one is corporate. It's just a party basically.
Yeah.
Like there are cops marching in it. There are like Zionist corporations like on the BDS list that are like sponsoring floats and stuff.
Yeah.
And like, so instead of like, we want to interrupt this with like a group that like, wants to abolish borders and supports migrants, and a group
Mm,
that's prison abolitionists and the Palestine resistance and the like this, like you could, you can actually have like a radical pride.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, yeah, but I think it's an interesting thing. I think that like maybe that is something we will see in future, but that's less about like Palestine specifically, and just more like if there's an opportunity to kind of majorly subvert pride by doing that.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah. um but yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's being done, is taking the opportunity to like point out, as the I am I mistaken that June is meant to be Pride Month? Because like at this point, I feel like the whole summer has become the Pride months.
In New Zealand, Pride Month is in February.
Oh.
So it's always like way over by the time, like like, and it's really funny because then you can see a lot of online discourse that we get from TERFs and all those kind of stuff. It'll kick off in about Pride when it's like June, when everyone else
Yeah.
is having their Pride Month, and it's kind of like you
Oh,
can
right,
start
because it's
to like
all
notice
focused on the Anglosphere. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Like
exactly. And it's like, so
that's
all
really
these
funny.
people that are like really, pretend they're really invested in it or
Yeah,
whatever,
but it's
kind
the
of show
middle of
their
winter
hand
for
at that point.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's kind of this thing. It's like, oh, damn, like, like they'll be talking about like even, just like these like reactionary conservative groups will be talking about like, it's Pride Month and we've got to like protect our children this month and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, man, like you already missed it by like 4 months. But yeah.
Yeah. But have you seen the coverage of the DNC this week with the Democratic National
Yeah.
Convention's been going on?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Um,
been wild with the uncommitted movement and everything like that. It's been
yeah,
yeah,
what I think the thing that's really like stuck with a lot of people, for that coverage was the footage of Democrats leaving the DNC and covering their ears
covering
and
their
saying,
ears. Yeah.
like literally saying la 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 la, like I can't hear
Mm.
you, like as the names of dead Palestinians are being read out. Like
I know.
it's
It's
so
like,
sickening.
yeah, it's totally wild. And like people are saying, like, oh yeah, it's like really loud. It's like they had megaphones and all this kind of stuff like that. It's just
Yeah,
like,
that's the point.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah,
It's
we're
like, yeah,
trying to get your attention to like make you like care tiniest bit that there's a genocide
yeah.
going on. But yeah, I guess I like my question is about like disruption of the DNC, like where we think the value kind of
Mm.
lies. Because I think to some degree, when you see footage like this, where they are like covering their ears and saying la la la, or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
being
Or like being
flippant, or
jerks
like,
and like, yeah, flipping and like laughing and
yeah,
being like
like,
teasing them even and stuff. It's like,
yeah,
man, like,
totally. Then
what's
they're
going
like
on here?
security guards, like being like, just keep a distance. You're citizens, stay away from the like, party apparatchiks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like I think the production of those kinds of videos is actually like really itself a quite valuable thing for, I guess I wouldn't wish that there were like a million people showing up to protest the DNC,
Mm.
to try and get them to change on this. I think that like a handful of people showing up, and then like enough people to get the videos of the like DNC, the
Mm.
Democrat ghouls ignoring them, is itself like quite, uh yeah, like I think that's a valuable thing. I think that gets people mad, that gets people invested in
Yeah.
joining in on the movement against Israeli genocide.
Yeah.
I
It
guess.
has been wild to watch it, right? Like this whole, and it's like I feel like what the uncommitted movement is doing is good. And they're like the way that they're pointing out to people that it's like this is the time to be making demands from these people, right? It's not
Mm,
like, like there's a lot of people saying like you're going to cost us the election. Like if you want to make demands about Gaza, do it after we win. And it's like, oh, you mean we're at the point where like nobody is incentivized to do anything? And it's like,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't have a huge amount of faith in the DNC to, make any change to their position regardless. Like even
yeah,
if even if they were like, okay, cool, we're gonna do something about this because this represents a huge block of voters that we cynically want to gain, then like by the time it actually gets to doing something, I know that it would be just some watered down, like less money to Israel, but like still, like 90% of what we would, just like some stupid shit like that, like with Black
yeah,
Lives Matter, how they ended up just giving the cops more money to train
yeah,
them better so they didn't make mistakes, just like, yeah,
yeah. I don't
like
know. It's like
objectively terrible things.
it's easy. I think I when we talk about when we talk on this show about why we shouldn't talk about electoral politics, it's always the thing we say is like it's the framework that
Mm.
you're being given. It's like all your attention is here, and you're not allowed to look
Yeah,
anywhere
yeah.
but here. And so only the things that within this space matter at all. And it's like there are things that feel like they probably could make a difference. Like
Mm.
Biden's relationship to Netanyahu, where like Netanyahu can just like insist that he gives him the phone so he can play Roblox right now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and Biden's like, okay, I just want to be able to watch the football in peace, so you can have it.
Mm.
Um, you can't tell what this anecdote is inspired by. That relationship, may actually be different. With Kamala Harris, who can say, right? But
Yeah,
it's like as soon as you look outside of this frame, you always see like that this where all your attention was is actually like tiny, tiny, tiny. Like
yeah,
it
yeah.
it relates to enormous levels of power. It
Mm.
relates to things that could absolutely shift like so much real power in the world.
Yeah.
But like there is just so much else going on in politics besides that. And like when you when it comes to yeah, I mean, when it comes to those levels of power, like they still exist in real terms in physical spaces, and
Mm.
that's so I mean, something we have seen in the last couple of weeks since the last show, like in the UK, Palestine Action UK broke into Elbit's Bristol site using a repurposed
Yeah.
prison van. I don't know how they got their hands on a prison van, but that fucking whips. Like they drove it, like
Amazing.
smashed into the facility, and then they've got like video basically like go sort of GoPro POV shots of like what the actionists were doing, like smashing up the stuff,
So
um,
good.
which is so cool to see because it's like it has effects on so many levels. Like there's the immediate level, it is this sabotage. Like
Yeah.
you can see what they're doing. They're literally just smashing up the facility and
Mm.
making it impossible for Elbit to operate. Elbit, if people don't know this, is Israel's largest operating weapons manufacturer in the UK.
Like they make the pieces that get put together into drones and everything
Yeah,
like
like
that. Like they,
when we tell a story about like there's a drone playing the sounds of like
yeah.
like babies suffering, and so that
Mm.
Palestinians come out and then they get shot. Like Elbit is literally manufacturing drones like that in this
Yeah, yeah.
place. So it's like seeing people like break in and smash the fuck out of it. It whips, like it's so good. And so there's the level of the immediate sabotage itself, but like Palestine Action is like I think really savvy with like their media strategy of like recording and editing this stuff and releasing them on social media so people can see it. Because like firstly, like it's absolutely magnetic footage. Like you
It's the same as
you
like the
want to
Al
see it
Qassam
and you want to
Brigades
share it.
footage. It's like,
Yeah.
like seeing like the little red triangle and everything like that is just like, just yeah, it's like it's yeah. There's you don't see this stuff like that off. Well, yeah, up until recently, like you would never see this kind of footage of what
Yeah.
exactly is happening there. You just see on the news later, you'd be like, oh, like you used to hear it a lot with like ALF protesters and stuff. They'd be like, oh, some like animal rights people, like freed some bunnies or something like that.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah. They
like, okay,
opened some
cool, but
cages
like
and you're like, okay, sure.
you don't know what that's
Yeah.
like. But then when you see this in real life, it's like, oh, this is
Yes.
what's happening. Like this is
Because
like, yeah.
because
It's amazing.
I think there is a moment of victory, a moment of achieving that stuff that's like this rush
Mm,
for people that like it's when you have seen it, when you do know what it looks like, you can absolutely understand why people are like so dedicated in these movements. If you think about like the ALF people letting,
yeah.
freeing some bunnies or whatever, like getting rescuing
Mm,
a dolphin from the aquarium,
yeah, yeah.
like it's like if you were there, that must be an amazing moment. And if you can't see it and you can't feel the material impacts of it, and or and maybe even worst case scenario, like you live nearby and you were going to take your kid to the aquarium and now you can't because it's closed because the dolphin got stolen. Like, like, like none of this like hits right.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's no equivalent there. There's not like unless your kid has the worst kind of autism, you weren't going to take them on like a tour of the Elbit factory. But like,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
but yeah,
No,
do
honestly,
something
like,
do something about that kid. Get them a different
I would
special
say
interest.
from what I've seen about some of the like, like the Zionist psychos, like, no, they would do that. They'd have those kids signing those fucking
Yeah,
drones. Like they
yeah,
absolutely
yeah, yeah,
would.
yeah. Yeah, drawing a little picture you put up on the fridge of like a drone with a machine gun.
The fucking
Um,
Hatsune Miku on the side or some shit.
but like when you do produce that footage, like it's a secondary thing besides I'd argue it's like a secondary and a tertiary thing
Yeah.
besides the sabotage itself because it gives people the rush
Yeah.
and kind of
It's
that
like, yeah, like,
propagandizes them to maybe go get involved. It lets people know that the thing is happening and like in a way that the news won't report on. It maybe gets people involved directly with Palestine action, but maybe it just like gets people involved in a way that's like they get involved in whatever they can get involved in
yeah,
with pro-Palestine protest, and they are thinking of this footage in their head when they're doing it, right? Like this is
exactly.
something
And
that we're trying to
yeah,
do with like when I talk again about the purpose of the show, like
yeah,
when we show, we had the interview with uh, Alexis DeLumis, who made Belkaceb, right? Like when you watch Belkaceb and you see like the YPG like shooting ISIS, right?
yeah, yeah.
If you're doing something that is in some way like affiliated to them, you're like, yes, I am like part of that same struggle. Like
Mm,
that is, I'm a part of that. And it's like when we make the Zad documentary, which is in progress, like in the same way, like if you're part of climate politics, if you can see, like actually see media like footage
yeah,
of like the how incredible this stuff is, you could just ultimately, you'll be like cooking the vegan stew for your like affinity groups meeting or whatever, so that you're like stopping the construction of some like gentrified apartments that are gonna be terrible for your local environment, like,
yeah.
and that's
And
all you're doing. It's not that big. It feels very mundane, but you're
mm,
thinking about something really fucking cool, and I think that like there's something really important there, right?
I remember having this conversation when, like a lot of the footage of the Al Qassam brigades and stuff came out, and it's like this thing where it's like when a lot of people will go and they'll like watch a movie like Hunger Games or something like that, and they'll, like, and they come away, like a young person might watch that movie or read that book and come away and being like, man, imagine if that was us. Imagine if we were fighting that fight. And then, like I feel like these videos and like documentaries like Belkacebe make people see like, oh, that fight is a thing that is like that fight is being fought, you know? Like, and it's like I think that can be electrifying for people to be like, like, I think it's like a really effective form of propaganda because it is quite like, and like, like I know there's a lot of like arguments about adventurism and all this kind of, stuff like that, but it's like that thing where it's like you could be part of that. You could be, one of the freedom fighters. You could be one of the rebels. You could be, all this kind of stuff, which I think is like a very romantic thing for people to kind of like get involved with. Like obviously we want everyone to have like a nuanced and like developed
Yeah.
idea about what they're actually getting involved with and all this kind of stuff. But I think for like propaganda purposes, it's like there's nothing really you could think of that could be stronger for a lot
But
of
yeah,
people than to appeal to
yeah.
that sense.
For me, adventurism, like if you're critiquing, so I mean, yeah, let's return to the
Mm.
ALF for a second. Like
Yeah.
if you're critiquing an org and like all they do, and I don't mean to I'll maybe be caricaturing the ALF a bit here, but like all they do is free bunnies, right? Like they all they do is like find places where animals are in captivity and let them go. Then yeah, you could say like this is adventurism. Like you haven't built up an org that is like targeting the structures in a way that is going to like could ever really meaningfully result in the change that you're looking for in the world. But like adventurism as a critique, like it's this idea that like you are only targeting people to get involved with organizing and activism who are looking for an adventure to go on. But I'm just like the problem for me with this critique is when it gets thrown around, it often gets thrown around at like at the process of targeting, the process of propagandizing. And there it's like, right, but people need adventures to believe in. They don't necessarily need to go on adventures, right? Like you don't, right? Like, you don't need to go and like shoot ISIS yourself unless you decide you're going to do that. Like go do it, fine, whatever. But like you do need to be able to believe in something.
Yeah, a lot of people use those critiques as a way to, I think, like justify their own inaction as well. Um, I saw this a lot when uh there was like years ago there was down here there was um well, it's not maybe 2 years ago or whatever, there was like a lot of trans rights protests that like actually got like pretty heavy. There was like a lot of kind of like fascist resistance and stuff. And a lot of people were saying like, no, this is like, to go out there and challenge them is like adventurism, because you're just like, you're going to make things worse for trans people as a whole if we escalate this level of like violence and stuff. And like, oh, you're going to go out there and you're going to feel real cool like doing all this, but then you're going to make things worse. And I don't think that that is true. I feel like that is it is worse to let them go unchallenged, right? It is
Yeah.
worse to let them organize and to do all that kind of stuff. And it's like,
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
and a lot of people were saying like, oh, and this is a lot of these critiques came from cis people, I would say. I'm pretty sure as well. And they said like, oh, cis people going out, you're gonna go out and you're gonna, go fight the fash or whatever like that, and then they're going to go and they're going to go like jump a trans person because of it's been escalated or whatever like that. And it's like, I think their intention is just to do that anyway. So
Yeah, like
like
if you imagine the fash who is like emboldened enough to just attack a trans
yeah, yeah,
person, a person of color, whatever, like they will just do it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the reality is that like fascism works by this like logic of like the mindset of like bullies. Like they just
Mm,
bullies like don't like there's maybe one person who's emboldened like that and like doesn't care what happens to them and just wants to like hurt people. And then
yeah.
there's a bunch of people who like they want to be on the side of the bully, right? They have the
Mm,
same mindset fundamentally, but like they care about like, is the bullying working? Is it
mm,
successful? Is it showing that the person is powerful? And so like if a bunch of the bullies get together in one spot and just, declare that they have shitty, horrible opinions that suck, and no one stops them,
yeah.
then yes, it's working. And so more people who have that mindset will join in next time. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, I'm explaining the basics of anti-fascism now, but it's just like, yeah, like obviously, yes, it actually does do something to like
Mm.
punch fascists until they go away. That's the point. Um, but I'm gonna get back to the notes to try and steer back onto Palestine a little bit. I talked about Palestine Action UK, but I think an interesting thing while we're still talking about countries in the imperial core and resistance being done there is Palestine Action US have documented they have documented that a bridge was set on fire.
Mm.
Um, basically it says the Instagram post about this says rail bridge set on fire, Oregon, USA, 23rd of August 2024. Communique submitted anonymously to scenes.noblogs.com and reposted below. Target was a Portland and Western Railroad bridge trestle over the Willamette River between Lake Oswego and Milwaukee, Oregon. We will respond to the civilization that destroys the earth and possibility of free life with destruction in turn. The track is close to railroad traffic at this time. PNW traffic will be rerouted for quite a while, so Cornelius Pass may see a lot more traction. What else got here? PNWR has a diverse traffic base based on carload commodities, wood chips, paper, agricultural goods. Basically, they've like this bridge has been set fire to like uh sabotage a supply line that is it's I mean it's a supply line, it's a flow of capital, and
Yeah.
it's a flow of imperialism.
Mm.
And that's actually, sorry, I found the thing I was actually looking for. They put it in the comments, which was Pal Action US said, may this action be a warm greeting of solidarity to those who have struck blows, such as the attacks on cement plants in Germany, the Mapuche warriors fighting in Chile, saboteurs of the Mountain Valley Pipeline in West Virginia, attackers of the techno-fascist progressive green energy project Tesla, efforts against the military production companies such as Elbit powering the genocide of Palestinians, those steadily frustrating the efforts of Cop City and Atlanta, Georgia, and all those who take action recognizing that attack must be immediate and everywhere the facilities and the means of those responsible for the devastation are located, contributing to dialogue through direct action and attack. For those who we walk with on the offensive, we greet warmly. We take this action as a carrying of our dead. We have not forgotten and we carry on. And the communique has been signed some anarchists, which is I've seen a few times now as a increasingly popular way for
I think it's
anarchists
like
to sign things anonymously, just some
yeah,
anarchists,
a great
which I think is quite fun.
yeah, exactly. I think that's a very anarchist way
Yeah,
to
exactly.
kind of, and it underscores the point as well, and their ideology. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
super
So
interesting.
yeah, so Palestine Action US shared that, and as I said, it's the communique about it has been submitted anonymously. This is an interesting example of sabotage that's being done now in the imperial core, because like yeah, I mean when the supply lines are recognized and they, as I said before, like occupy physical space in the real physical
Mm,
world, that's a place where they can be sabotaged. And like that's
yeah,
when you realize that like all the stuff of like, I don't know, Kamala saying it's my time to speak, I get to speak now,
yeah,
I'm and it's like you're gonna be the president, like you're gonna we're gonna hear you speak so fucking much.
mm,
Speak about the genocide that's happening and maybe
yeah.
stop it. Like
It's really
but yeah,
frustrating to see that as kind of like framed as like a girl boss moment. It's
yeah, of
just
course.
like
Of course.
it's literally that meme, like I hear the next one is going to be sent by a woman. Like it's
Mhm.
literally that. It's yeah,
Exactly.
it's
But
so
yeah, but
frustrating.
then you realize that like this stuff is outside of that framework, and
Mm,
not only is it outside of that, but like it's it's such a perfect direct response, because it's like within the framework itself of electoral politics demands that you believe the only way that levers of power could be moved to stop the
mm,
genocide or stop the devastation of the ecology or whatever is
yeah,
if the right person gets voted in. And instead, you just have like, well, let's look outside that framework, and the machine itself is just being smashed
yeah,
by some anarchists,
yeah.
which I think
Just some
is pretty cool.
anarchists.
Some
Yeah, yeah,
anarchists.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, cool. Well, so we've got should we go through the Al Jazeera updates or
Yeah, I think absolutely. Tell me some stuff about what's actually happening in Palestine itself.
well, so there was yeah, just like this is like only a couple days ago, there was a bit of a skirmish. Yeah, dozens killed, 100,000 displaced. That was like it was like a developing situation. Al Jazeera have been doing like really great kind of like live updates during a lot of these kind of things. Where they'll just like literally like once or twice an hour just go through and not just like comment on what is happening but also like link in other news coverage of like surrounding events and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, they did one just the other day, and it is like a little summary towards the end of like the whole events basically. But yeah, so little bullet points they got here were Medical sources have told Al Jazeera Arabic that at least 71 Palestinians were killed in raids across Gaza by Israel just in that one day. Israel's latest evacuation orders for Deir al-Balah have pushed more than 100,000 people out in less than 2 days, according to the local municipality. But yeah, so it's like this thing that they just keep doing, right? Like we keep seeing these Israel giving evacuation orders that are increasingly more unrealistic, over and over, just being like, okay, you have to move to this area because it's going to get bombed. And then when they bomb them, they're like, well, that was an evacuation zone. What were you doing? And even saw there was like an interview with a IDF soldier just, I think it was the day before yesterday, that came out where they talked about how they determined who was a terrorist and who was a civilian, and they basically would just like open fire on an area, and the people that didn't run they considered to be terrorists, which is like just absolutely deranged. And this is what they do. Basically they just tell everyone to leave, and if they don't leave, then they're a terrorist, and they're free range targets or whatever, which is
Yeah, what
like,
was that? What was that quote the other day where it was like, "How do you determine who's a terrorist?" And it was like, "Well, we just start shooting at this side of the street, and if anyone who doesn't like run away, anyone anyone who
yeah,
stands their ground at all, that's clearly a terrorist."
yeah, that's exactly it. Like, and it's this thing where it's like, so like that could be like for any number of reasons, but like especially if you've just been like day after day being told to move and leave and stuff, like there's obviously going to be people that just decide like, no, like I'm staying, I'm not running, um and yeah, so it's absolutely deranged, and like just like literally war crime, we all know that. So a Hamas delegation headed by senior official Khalil al-Hayya arrived in Cairo as part of the, this like the ongoing ceasefire talks and all that kind of stuff. Um, so there's some negotiations happening on there. Um, yeah, and they mentioned they single out a woman and a young girl are among those killed in Israel's latest attack on the Burej refugee camp. So that's in central Gaza. Again, a refugee camp, which is like wild. And so a lot of these refugee camps are like actually kind of like towns now, because they are like they've just been refugee camps for so long. And a lot of kind of like Zionists and conservatives will kind of use it as a gotcha. They'll be like, this doesn't look like a refugee camp, it's like a shanty town sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, like think about that, like why,
Yeah, because there are so many refugees because of what you're doing.
yeah, inside Gaza, like, so for 20 years in the open air prison, like these people have built these camps into small, like kind of shanty towns and communities and things like that. It's like, it's wild. And then like, I don't know, it's just frustrating to even like just the a refugee camp inside an open air prison
Yeah,
is like how could you look at attacks, raids and bombings on these places in any other way and not just think this is like, yeah, just absolutely just I don't know, it's hard to kind of conceptualize like how brainwashed you actually have to be to fall for any of that shit anymore, right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that to some degree it's like people are getting an immediate education on like what the frontier of empire looks like now with
Absolutely, yeah,
this, because it's like it's similar to the thing we were saying about like when actions and sabotages, you don't see them.
yeah,
You do, it's just far away. It's just not a real thing to you. But like now we're really seeing it, and like seeing it, like also having descriptions of the like internal logic of it like this, like
yeah,
as you say, like a refugee camp within an open air prison, right? And it's like it's not the first time that's kind of been the case, essentially,
yeah,
right? Like even if you even if you think of something kind of as a lot bigger area with less of like the modern military equipment and
mm,
different conditions, as like the genocide of Native American people, like
Oh yeah. Well,
like
yeah, it's
this
an
kind of
interesting.
logic happened as that was happening too. Like this is the way the frontier of empire works, right?
Yeah, there was an interesting thing that friend of the show, Amy, was saying on Twitter about how a lot of this is actually exactly how they settled a lot of New Zealand. A lot of there were large sections here where during certain conflicts, or even at the beginning of certain conflicts, like the Waikato Wars and stuff like that, it was basically them going like, okay, cool, we're gonna draw a border here, and everyone that is on this side of the border is, if you're Maori, you're considered, you're a rebel. Like basically, if you don't leave before the certain date, you're the opposing army, and so there were even like cases of like uh people that didn't even know this was a thing, never heard it before, and then people rolling up on their village, like armed artillery, all this kind of stuff, and just like, and this constant moving of the line where it's like, okay, cool, now the line is down here, now it's further around here, like it's exactly how places are settled, if you want to use
Yeah,
that
I guess I find it
terminology.
like, yeah, like I guess I find it distressing to think a little bit about there's like this contiguous logic that's being rolled out when it comes to empire. It's like everything within this world like fits together, and it's part of an imperial project, and everything outside of it is like messy and doesn't make any sense and is just like
Mm,
chaotic, and so has to be just like steamrolled over. And it's like it's not. It has its own logic. It has its own.
yeah,
This is always the struggle of like trying to explain to settlers that like what came before was like people with like
yeah,
actual
yeah.
like communities and ways of living and like that made sense, just a different kind of sense. But I guess like all the discourse of like the International Criminal or International Court of Justice, which I whenever I hear like ICJ, I'm always thinking like insane clown. No, it's the International Criminal Justice,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
stuff like the
Insane clown
ICJ
jesters.
and yeah, like the ICJ, like the UN, um, like these bodies dissecting and discussing like does this count as genocide, like is this a war crime or whatever. And it's like what like there shouldn't be a situation where someone gets killed by a drone strike. How about that? Like they're
Mm,
just like
yeah.
there's
How
like
about that?
the like yeah, like the idea the dissection of like whether this was done in a way that like violates international law, like is such a horribly like bone-chillingly inhuman discussion. And
Mm,
it's because it's a discourse of the ruling class, like because it perpetuates their world. We have to remember like the entire imperialist project is, when I talk about that logic and everything fitting together within the imperialist project, it's because like it's the logic of the ruling class and it's the world
yeah.
they're trying to build, right? And
Mm,
like and that's why it's so inhuman when you have a discussion of like does this count as a war crime or not, and you find yourself again like stuck in a framework like only look within these bounds. And it's like very useful parts of that
yeah.
too, like we should talk a little bit about declining American power in a second, but like there are useful parts where it's like if the UN and the ICJ are saying this is fucked up and America and Israel are just completely ignoring them, that shows like the logic itself just like no longer working and like coming apart at the seams.
Yeah.
But it's it just sucks. It just sucks so bad to like have these discourses that will always eventually like get boiled down to like, okay, so who is responsible then? I guess Netanyahu and some of his ministers must have been the guys who did the war crimes. So after the war crimes are done, then we'll all agree that, you know, oh well, the war crimes got done and now those guys are responsible and they'll go to the Hague, right? And
Yeah.
that's like the liberal progressive like best outcome is like they get tried at the Hague. And it's like, what about the Palestinian families who like they've lost everyone and they've lost their
Yeah.
homes, and they already like the previous generation had to relocate like into Gaza because they weren't there before. They
Yeah.
were on
Yeah.
previously like colonized land. Maybe they owned like a whole farm before, and now they had a tiny apartment in Gaza City, and
Yeah.
now it's just rubble, and just like everyone they know is dead, and you're just like, okay, well, we're gonna like try these guys for the war crimes as the
Mm.
best case scenario, and it's like this is why you have to like oppose the imperialism itself,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I guess that's why like that's where we come around to critical support, right? Because like
Mm.
when we're talking about groups who we don't think they are like based cool woke chads, right? Like they
Yeah.
don't share like every value that like I'm a trans woman talking about this, okay? Like let's just like be straightforward when I'm talking about like the Houthis and Hezbollah, that I
Yeah.
don't think they share my whole worldview, and I'm not confident I could share a room with anyone. Like, um, at the same time, like, why you have like then we'll be cheering on like seeing like the Houthis like set fire to some fucking oil tanker in the Red Sea and like divert traffic to
Yeah.
like stop supply to Israel, or Lebanese rockets getting fired at Tel Aviv or whatever. Like the reason that this is worth cheering on is that it's kind of like you have to understand the kind of like the imperialist project falling apart and getting swallowed up by what it views as just like the chaotic noise of everything outside of it.
Mm.
That is a good outcome in terms of like no more fucking children getting blown to
Yeah.
smithereens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, like there may be other violence that will happen. There may be, whatever, but it's just like Israeli society is so deeply fucking sick. There were riots to defend the right of the IDF to
Yeah.
rape Palestinian political prisoners. Like
Yeah.
it's such a fucking politically like sick fascist society. And like, yeah, like it getting like
Like a blow
if
against these guys is like it's good. Like it's like
yeah,
that's as simple as I can put it. It's just like,
it's just good,
it's good.
exactly. Like
It's just good.
yeah,
And I also
like so,
think that like it's it is one of those things where like yeah, like obviously it's like critical support. We can't it's not, when people are resisting empire in this way, it's not necessarily like useful for us to be like picking apart like their like our kind of like ideological differences to a point. Like obviously there is like there are like exceptions to that, but it's like the same thing with like like with Hamas. They're obviously like they have right-wing beliefs, not like
mm,
the PFLP, who are like explicitly like very like egalitarian leftists and all this kind of stuff like that. And it's kind of
yeah.
like those conversations we can have like after the children not being killed anymore and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff, like yeah,
this
which
is
is
one
yeah.
of my earliest moments of like Twitter is fucking useless. We will never have a productive discussion about anything on there.
Mm,
Was like forever ago. Um, when was it? It was when the American military was pulling out of Afghanistan, right?
yeah.
And I said like Afghanistan would be in a better position if America had never been occupying it, right?
Mm,
Like if they had just left the fuck alone was
yeah.
the shape of the take I was offering. And like I had some people from Afghanistan being like, yes, thank you. I also had a bunch of people like picking apart the way that they had said things to be like,
Yeah.
you're saying that if Afghanistan was under the Taliban, it would be better. And I'm like, no, I'm saying that like left alone, the people of Afghanistan over the last 20 years of occupation, if instead they just like they would have overthrown the Taliban themselves, because
Mm,
everyone hates living under the Taliban or
yeah.
ISIS or whatever. Like it's a shit situation that everyone fucking hates, and those regimes like don't last. But
Yeah.
now you've got like 20 years of American imperialism and like living under the boot of America, and then the Taliban is back in. So like, what have you
Yeah.
achieved in the long run? Like fucking nothing. Like, um, I don't know. Like, it I guess it's tempting to just try and boil it down just to like, yeah, a blow against them is good. Um, but I feel the need I'm feeling to like dissect the idea a little bit more is because like one of my partners sent me a video this morning actually of a guy at a Palestine protest who's carrying a Hezbollah flag, and someone else who's like pro-Palestinian is like, what are you doing? And he says that he's like, he goes like, I'm pro Hezbollah, I'm pro Houthis, I'm pro North Korea and China and Russia. And that's just like, what are you talking about? And it's like, this is why we have to have like the concept of critical support, because like
Yeah, yeah.
if you just go, your brain just like flips and it's just like anything that is done against the bad guy is a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
good guy.
Yeah,
It's like,
I
that's
feel
not,
like
yeah,
it's not good as a base for your politics, but you know, when supporting other movements, like I mean, it's like yeah, like you know, it's like as an ideological thing, it's like absolutely not flawed. It's absolutely not a good idea because then you end up like turfs that are just like, oh yeah, you know, like these
right,
Nazis are cool because they hate trans people too. But
right.
as like a response to events, you know, like if there was like, you know, if we see an attack on America from someone that we know is like definitely not our friends, like I'm
Hmm.
probably gonna make a meme about it, you know, like
Yeah, I think that's another
that's
one as well.
basically my
Like
position.
it's a, like a meme isn't like material support
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
Hezbollah or whatever, right? Again, I mean, like that guy showing up waving a Hezbollah flag isn't really material support to it either,
Yeah,
but
no, 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 no,
he's
no.
definitely like wasting his time. And I
Yeah.
think this is where like, we have to see how things actually fit together. And it's like from the position in the Imperial Core, like what we do to help Palestinians is we sabotage the imperial machine, you
Yeah.
know? And like, so we don't help the people who are directly attacking, right? Because like
Mm.
we can't, like again, unless you're going to go to Yemen or Lebanon or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, like we can't help directly with that, and we don't. That's not how this fits together. But like it has to be understood that when you are, I guess, strangling the imperial machine, sabotaging it, setting fire to stuff, smashing up drones or whatever, like
Mm.
the alternative, like the thing that is winning out because of it are these forces who are fighting Israel directly.
Going back to what we say about like sabotaging the you know, sabotaging Elba and stuff like that, like I just, you know, like I feel like people don't get it so much. And like when they think about it, you know, when they look at those videos and everything like that, that there's this, you know, like every drone that doesn't make it to Israel is a drone that doesn't make it to Gaza, you know, and like
Yeah.
every like, you know, even like with Palestinian Action, some of their most successful stuff has been making it unprofitable for Albert to operate in that community. And it's like,
Yes.
and you know, like something like an attack like that on, you know, their, whether it's like their manufacturing, their anything like that is you know, corresponds to their bottom line and stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, I don't know, just kind of like a little bit of a tangent there, but it's like these little things, like, you know, just like even, you know, like if you go into one of those factories and destroy a small component that uh, builds up a larger piece, like it might only be a little bit of plastic and metal and, you know, like wires and things like that, but that's probably like, you know, like a $50,000 fucking thing, you know. So it's like I feel sorry, yeah, like a little bit of a tangent there and stuff, but I think there is, you know, like that's something to think about
Yeah.
in
Well, so
yeah.
when I'm talking about like the properly understanding critical support
Mm.
mean like and how it fits in to like opposing imperialism, the note that from the notes, the thing I wanted to move on to talking about was
Yeah.
I don't think people are super aware of this, but like China has been facilitating talks between the Palestinian factions, right? Like
Oh
there are
yeah.
many factions. There are, I think, 13 or 14 different factions of Palestinian leadership who are who historically have been at odds with each other,
Mm.
and and because they have like different like
Yeah, yeah.
ideological standpoints or whatever, and like they've been brought together in Beijing to like figure out how to work together and like to meaningfully oppose Israel like as one block. And it's like it's an interesting thing there because it's interesting from a few angles, right? One is when people are dying like this on this mass scale, this kind of conversation becomes trivial. It's like you could have never seen past your ideological differences before, and now it just
Yeah.
becomes so easy as long as like some other rich, powerful country can give you a neutral third space
Mm.
to just hatch things out there, right? Like it becomes easy to do that. And that reminds me of when we were talking to Alexis de Loomis about like basically the closer you get to the front line where they were like fighting ISIS, like the less ideological differences matter. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just like are you pointing a gun at like a Daesh fascist right now? Then it doesn't matter if you're like
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
Marxist Leninist or an anarchist or like a liberal who just doesn't want ISIS to control this territory. Like you've never
Mm.
really thought about it, but you don't want people to be beheaded because they went outside at the
Yeah.
wrong time or like whatever. Like they played some music or tried to dance. Like
Yeah, yeah.
the ideological stuff just disappears. And I think that like that is interesting. That's an interesting thing itself. Like just that talk becomes trivial. I think it's also interesting that like China is able to do this because
Mm.
like it speaks to a waning American influence in the world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Because like at the height of American imperialist power, like China saying we're going to help Palestine organize to stop Israel.
Mm.
That's like so this is something we haven't really discussed so far in the discussion. It's something we touched on briefly in previous episodes of Red Planet, but like America and Israel like have a materially vital relationship. Like
Mm.
people fuck it up, right? And they they basically describe the tail wagging the dog, and just say all sorts of like anti-Semitic like conspiracy
Yeah.
theories of like the Zionist influence pulling the strings and blah blah blah. And it's like you're seeing how important Israel is to America because
Mm.
Israel is a settler colonial white supremacist project of like the conglomerate imperialism
Yeah.
of like historic imperialism, right? Like
Yeah.
we call it American imperialism. It is a conglomeration of like all of the empires leading up into the 20th century that like basically fought World War II against each other and then like
Yeah.
settled on treaties by like agreeing to share power and form
Mm.
one big empire together essentially. Like and the communist nations were caught on the other side of that because they weren't part of that like
Yeah.
imperialist thing. And that's why like Russia and China still, still like that's a big part of why Russia and China still kind of on the outside of that and remain on the outside
Yeah.
of that. But like we call it American imperialism, but um, uh, the reason it's relevant to say that is that like Israel was founded as a British colony,
Yeah.
and then like it effectively traded ownership to America, but that's sounds like a kind of wacky and impossible thing to have done, but it's like with the collapse of British imperialism and as Israel became um like sought recognition as a proper state and not just a
Mm.
colony, like the moment they did that they called the American president like for like will you recognize us that we are
Yeah.
a state. And at that moment is like when America became like effectively the patron of Israel.
Mm.
And at that point like yeah it becomes like America is sort of sponsoring Israel, and in return it has its like foot in the door as this white supremacist outpost, like this outpost of like of America's imperialism in the Middle East that helps America to have control of oil in the
Yeah.
Middle East. Like I know that like to some people like it sounds like hammering on a same old thing, but it's like oil is everything to America. Like the
Yeah.
value of the dollar literally like is tied to oil.
Yeah.
Like the petrochemical like manufacturing as well as the fossil fuel industry, like everything is about oil for America. And like they have this kind of tense but like profitable relationship with the Saudis and the Saudis like are, you know, their biggest like partner in oil in the region, and that's heavily managed through Israel. Or like if we imagine a world where if we try and imagine a world where Israel isn't friends with America anymore or doesn't exist, like America's influence in the Middle East collapses, and like therefore its control over oil globally like collapses too. Like in a very, very meaningful sense, the fall of Israel would be the fall of American imperialism.
Like Biden said in that speech, like this is going back like maybe into like the late 80s. There was a speech from Biden where he like literally said, he was like, if Israel did not exist, it would be necessary for the USA to create it. And it's like, yeah, that's there. That's he just said the thing. He just said the whole thing, like right
Yeah,
there.
yeah, literally,
Yeah.
literally. And it's like there's all of the tension around like uh the Abrahamic religions and like the geographic significance of Israel to like the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, but like it's that's in a sense that's a distraction. Like it's a kind of, you know, it's so much culture rests on that shit, but it's kind of it makes it a good location to be having the Christian imperialist outpost there, right? And it fits cohesively with like American evangelicals believe that if they can get all of the Jews into Israel, like the rapture will happen. This kind of shit like fits together, but it's not the material reason. The material reason is oil always.
I think it's like kind of that confirmation bias, right? Like if it had been anywhere else, none of that shit wouldn't have been important, but they would have found something else to focus on. But because it is there, they're like, oh, this is a great narrative that, you know, like a lot of people can profit on in different ways, right? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but then it's also like it's also on the Red Sea. Like its location is, you know, significant for a bunch of reasons. Um um but yeah, this is all that to say like that is why China helping Palestine meaningfully oppose Israel would have been something that would get like everyone like watching the doomsday clock like a few decades ago. And now like the fact that China can do that and it's not pushing the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation immediately like actually speaks to something really significant, which is the decline of American power in the world. And like you can kind of look at this a bit chicken and the egg. Like if Israel falls, America falls, but like also if America has less power, it can't protect Israel as well as it would have previously. And yeah, I think that's like, yeah, like I guess in this discussion, I'm just trying to highlight how everything fits together in different parts of the world. And like in the imperial core, all we have is sabotage, and we're doing it. And there's like calls for escalation, and we're seeing escalation happen. You know, so like people have been getting the ball rolling on the kind of stuff that Mule is like away being involved in organizing this week, like which is, you know, itself also kind of sabotage, like, you know, sabotaging corporate pride or whatever. Um, but like there's an escalation now to like the kinds of sabotage that like Palestine Action have been doing for ages, and now there's like that arson attack that Palestine Action US was sharing about, but I'm not totally sure if that was directly to do with Palestine, but like, you know, these kinds of escalations are happening in actions of
Yeah.
sabotage
Well,
within the
I mean,
imperial core.
they mentioned in the thing they viewed it as part of like the wider kind of struggle and linked them, you know, to other movements. They mentioned you know, like Gaza and stuff in there, but it's kind of like I guess they're looking at the bigger picture of like the supply line is linked to all these struggles, which I think is, you know, like a really like that's a connection that can't be stressed enough, right? So
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's just kind of one of the wacky things about these supply lines is that like the supply lines of, again, I'm calling it American imperialism, but I think it's really worth understanding that we just don't have a good name for what the empire is, right? But it's like it is actually this American Euro, like, and also like Japan is a meaningful part of like the power holders.
yeah.
Like this is why we just say the imperial core, right? But like the supply lines of imperialism, they they are all doing all the bad shit, like all the
Yeah.
worst shit that you hate. Like they just go through the same supply lines. And so
Yeah.
like if we collectively are just kind of like we want to stop all the worst shit, then that's where sabotage is like increasingly
Yeah.
happening. Like this is why How to Blow Up a Pipeline is like the text that we all read to like
Yeah.
kick off like doing this show, is because like the concept of like sabotaging the empire from within is like
Yeah.
something that we're just going to see happening more and more and more. But when it
Mm.
comes to Palestine, yeah, like it doesn't fit together. Like it's not like some the some anarchists who signed that communique are like
Mm.
in communication and solidarity with like the Chinese government. They're very much
Yeah.
not. And it's not like they or China are like talking to Hezbollah and the Houthis. I mean,
Mm.
possible that China is, but like, but
Yeah.
they're not. But like there isn't a united force against the empire in that way, but like this is how this stuff does fit together. And I guess that brings us like that kind of gives us some idea of where stuff is going, like
Yeah.
where what the vision is of like a defeat of Israel, because that's kind of, I mean, obviously what we ultimately want for the sake of
Yeah.
Palestinians, for the sake of no more children being blown to smithereens, right?
We've only got one question so far. Yeah, maybe we'll just start getting into those. Um
Yeah.
so we have one from Praise the Sun. Their question is US military aid to Israel has been a stipulation that the US can redeploy those arms for other US operations in the Middle East. Do you think the UK arms have a similar deal with Israel? That's interesting. I knew that they did that stuff. I didn't know if it was like you know, a legitimate deal or anything like that. But yeah, what do you think about the UK? Is there anything,
Um,
you know?
Yeah, like as far as I'm aware, no, I don't think that the UK's arms industry works that way because
Mm.
so the reason for that stipulation for the US is that the US's power is such a military one in the world.
Mm.
And like the US derives its power from having a big military. And so like sending military aid over to Israel is yeah, like that stipulation to be able to use those arms if they want to is a part of the project that we were just talking about a minute ago.
Yeah.
Like that it is a colonial outpost for America. And so if they
Mm.
decide that they wanted to like go to war with, well, like Lebanon, right? Like Israel is at war, is like fighting with Lebanon right now. If the US decided that they wanted to, like they would have a bunch of stuff handily already in Israel.
Yeah.
Like the UK, it's really important to understand like the UK just doesn't have that kind of power. Like the UK,
Mm.
firstly, just doesn't have very much power on the global stage anymore in general. But like the power that it does have is all financial. Like it's all financial.
Yeah.
HMRC, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, is
Yeah.
like effectively a massive money laundering operation, like
Mm.
for the empire. Like the the instruments of like financial control that the imperialist project like has over the rest of the world like operate through the UK enormously and move their money through the UK enormously. And like this is a, I mean, like okay, so when I've talked about new builds, like okay, so okay, I'm going to go on a tangent. It's about gentrification. Um, when we talk about gentrification as a force, like obviously, like building unaffordable apartments, because building them, like getting them built, whether anyone buys them or not, is like a thing that like increases the stock price of a company and like
Mm.
helps the like stock evaluations of like the construction sector of the stock market, right? Like this is the effectively the financial engine that drives like why loads of empty, hyper expensive, ugly and shitty looking apartments get
Mm.
built in places. But like when that gentrifying force is happening in most of the world, it's like it's done somewhat conservatively with the possibility that like some rich people will come buy these apartments um because like that logic isn't so rampant, whereas in places that are like you can see the effect of like that completely detached, Marx would call it like fictitious capital,
Yeah.
um, having effects in the real world when there are just like infinite empty, ugly, expensive tower blocks being built, right? So the reason like we fucking hate new builds so much is that like they have this eeriness to them, right? Like they are um they are there and they're doing nothing for us. Like they don't obey the logic of the place they are in, right?
Mm.
Like they're not just a gentrifying force. Like people with more money are going to move in, and then more expensive shops are going to pop up, and then people are going to be evicted because blah 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 blah. Or a gentrifying force because the council is going to kick out people who are currently there in order to build them. Their evil has this other quality to it, which is the quality that like nobody asked for this, and that's
Mm.
so real. Like nobody wants, again, infinite numbers of ugly and expensive empty apartments. And in the UK and Ireland, this problem is absolutely fucking rampant. Like across different parts of the US, you get more or less of this as well. But like
Yeah.
London and Dublin have this problem massively. Because it's not just a gentrifying force, it's a force of like the construction and housing sectors of the stock market reassuring themselves that things are getting built, even if no one is going to live in them, even if no one can live in them, because you're building them like on a floodplain and it's going to be literally uninhabitable in 10 years because of climate change, right? Um, all of that is the kind of logic that the UK's power works through, and like the arms industry, for as long as like the imperialist project's power is being settled in conflict somewhere in the world, somewhere far away, the arms industry is always going to be a profitable sector. And so this
Yeah.
is why the UK has a big arms industry, but not because it has a big military. The UK's military power is so small, and the UK's like political power in that very direct and like conflictual way is so small. The
Mm-hmm.
UK's arms industry is about money in a way that the US is not. The US's arms industry is about guns, bullets, bombs, right? Like so. No is the answer to the question. But if they do have that stipulation, that's a surprise. But that's not how the UK's power works. So
Yeah.
I would be surprised by that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's actually a great answer. That actually, it makes sense that, like I did have that kind of like basic understanding of how the UK kind of arms industry works versus like, America, that is like, the military industrial complex, the whole thing, the standing army, the production and manufacture of goods is all like a very like it's tied in at every level. But yeah, but no, but that role makes absolutely a lot more sense for the UK. So cool. All right, do we have any
Yeah, I see another one here, which
oh yeah.
is what role do you all think the UK will play in Israel-Palestine relations going forward? And I
We've
mean,
done too much
honestly,
already.
yeah, like
Yeah.
an increasingly small one, probably, to be
Yeah.
honest. I don't really think that, yeah, like I
Hopefully.
say, um, it's like I can't really imagine the UK is gonna. Okay, I'm just gonna say the UK is not gonna flip around and support Palestine. That's not happening. There are other countries that can absolutely do this. Like Ireland is doing it. Ireland is like is recognizing Palestine.
Mm. Yeah.
The UK is going to carry on being on the side of Israel because it's on the side of the imperialist project.
Mm.
Uh, but I don't think it's going to be like I don't think it's going to have a significant kind of meaningful like the government will probably keep on sending some fucking diplomats to have some talks with people in Israel, like with Israelis, with parts of the Zionist project, like and that's about it, really,
Yeah, I
like
was just imagining like what you were saying about like, the UK is gonna keep being involved because they're on the side of capital. And it's like, they were like it did start as a British colony. I'm just like imagining the hot dog scene from I think you should leave. And Britain is the hot dog guy, and he's like, we're all trying to find the guy that did this. Like I
Yeah,
think
that
like
that
England
is
being involved
like,
in those talks and the
yeah,
mediation
that's
is
like ex-Prime Minister Lord David Cameron like going and like pressing humanitarian charges against fucking Netanyahu, like that's
yeah, exactly. It's like
that's our hot dog guy moment.
he's like,
Like,
how could you
yeah.
do this to me?
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, that there you go. There is a probably a fairly reasonable prediction for like the UK's role in this stuff. Like, if
Mm,
Netanyahu and some of his ministers are held liable as like the individual guys who did the war crimes, and then once we've tried those guys, we can all move on, and Israel gets to carry on,
yeah,
happily partying on the paved over like corpses of Palestinians. Like, that's probably a role the UK will play, right? Is as
mm,
part of the like reconciliation that actually everything's fine, and like we've punished the bad people, therefore
yeah.
our empire is
The
just.
bad apples are gone.
Yeah.
You know.
Luckily the batch was fine.
Yeah. Luckily, everything else is all
Famously,
good.
this we have a
Yeah.
saying about bad apples, and it's that bad apples do nothing to the batch. The
Yeah.
batch doesn't care. The batch was good
Mm,
except for the bad apples. That's what
yeah. We
the
get rid of the
saying
bad
is.
ones, and then the good ones. It's fine. We're great.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's all our questions today.
It is.
So I don't think we really have homework. I guess it's like, if you want to go sabotage some stuff, I can't stop you. But like,
Yeah, if you are some anarchists.
yeah, if you are some anarchists, have a
But
cool
actually,
time.
yeah, if you haven't already, because we always bring it up, it was one of the first things that we talked about on the stream was that book by Andreas Malm, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. It is really interesting. It is a deliberately inflammatory title, so like it's not literally a book about that's going to tell you exactly how to do the thing. It's not about that. It's yeah, he is being provocative with that title. But check it out. There's also a film adaptation of it, which is quite interesting. The book is obviously a like it's not a narrative, it's not a story, but the movie is kind of like a story that follows a group of people that have all come to these conclusions from like looking at the world and the way that this book kind of presents to us, and they all decide that they are gonna step up and do something about it together. It's actually it's a fun movie if you like. It's kind of like a heist movie, except the heist
Yeah,
is like a
blowing up a
pipeline
pipeline.
sabotage.
Yeah.
um but
the,
yeah,
the
so
main
I would
critique, if you're gonna go watch the movie, to bear in mind is that like you like they all are fine with getting arrested. Like their plan works out with like getting arrested at the end, and they're fine with
mm,
that. And also like they aren't people who are in community with each other.
yeah.
And like the main critique to bear in mind is just that like that kind of sabotage should really be like the project of like a community that like are organizing to be able to do it in the long term and keep doing it and not get
Mm,
caught and have each other's backs. Like, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, it's a bit adventurous, I guess. What I'm actually saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I would say that like that is a criticism that I've seen of the film, that they were like, oh, this is adventurism. And also there was some stuff to do with the creation of the movie where there's things that they do in it where it's like, if you did this in real life, you would probably get hurt really bad, because they had to change things in the movie because they literally like they couldn't make a movie where they're like, oh, here's a guy like building a bomb to
So
to
don't
attack
try it at
infrastructure.
home, kids.
So yeah. So yeah, be I don't know. Yeah, it's the same thing going back in the day. There was like the anarchist cookbook that people would download off the internet, and they'd be like, I'm gonna do this, and then they would just end up like hurting themselves or people that they cared about. So yeah. Um so yeah. But I mean, you're all smart. You I hope. So yeah, that's it for this week.
Cool. Yeah.
Thanks for paying attention. Thanks for
Yeah.
listening. It's been a bit of a discussion episode, which is different to our usual formula. Normally, we obviously have the
Yeah.
guests and stuff. But
Well, I was going to say, like, we've been quite chatty and relaxed in this one because it's a discussion we didn't keep quite like tight to the 1 hour for the news that we usually do. If
Mm.
you enjoyed like us kind of chatting more like this, hopefully we're going to have some more like just hanging out and chatting content up on our Patreon as like Patreon exclusive content sometime soon. We should be having a little chat about DS9, but I think we've got other stuff
Yeah.
like we're floating as like yeah, like possible stuff that we will do where we're basically just hanging out. So
Yeah.
and there's other stuff you can get access to on the Patreon. It's patreon.com/red_planet. There are a bunch of tiers there to support us at different tiers if you want to check it out. And rewards such as access to our Discord. And at the highest tier, you get to be a sicko. So what does being a sicko mean, Tim?
So if you're a sicko, it means that we will shout you out at the end of every episode to thank you for your support, because sickos really do make a huge difference to us. And so yeah, just like this, basically. Thank you to our sickos, JBP, Queen Pib, and Risk Inverse. Yeah, for keeping the lights on.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Thank you, everyone. That's been another episode of Red Planet.
Yeah.
Before we go, Soph, where can people find you if they want a little bit more of Soph content?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I was saying before, I am returning to publishing videos imminently. If you're listening to the podcast, I might have a video up on Patreon by the time you hear this. It's
Hmm.
possible. Not that likely, but it will be up there really soon. So if you check out patreon.com/Sophie from Mars, that's how you help me keep the lights on personally. If you want to chuck me like a one-off donation, you can do that through my link tree, which is linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars also. And like all of my links are there. So like if you want to yeah, just check out all my stuff. It's all on my link tree. If you want to specifically see my videos early or read my essays or join my Patreon Discord, all of that is through my Patreon, patreon.com/Sophie from Mars. But Tim, where can people find you?
So you can find me on YouTube and Twitch at Conquest of Dread. Not that I'm super active on either of those, but also on Twitter or Blue Sky as Dread Conquest. You can find me over there, or if you want to check out the tabletop RPG that I've been putting together for a little while, that is like kind of in its last days before it comes out. Jump over to Twitter and look up at Dark RPG 2000. There'll be some interesting news about that coming up soon too. But yeah, and then obviously you can find DJ Mule in all the DJ Mule places. Who's not here right now? Yeah, yeah. He should be back with us next week. Yeah, cool.
Okay.
All right. Well, we will
Well,
see you
we'll
all
see you
next
next
time.
week. Bye.